Welcome to my channel. In my channel, you can watch various type of fiction and fantasy audiobook. If you want more video like this, please subscribe my channel.
American Comics. Rise of the Dark Tyrant. Part 1. Ha ha ha, I've done it. In a hidden underground room in Queens, New York, John Gilchang tightly gripped a vial of reagent emitting a faint golden glow. The look in his eyes as he stared at the reagent was even more fanatical than if he were looking at a naked Wanda. He roared at the sky, almost wanting to give the heavens a couple of kowtows. 25 years. Do you know how I've lived these 25 years? Ever since transmigrating into this danger-filled Marvel universe, Gilchang had lived with extreme caution. Although he was bound to a system at birth, the problem was that this troublesome thing actually had a prerequisite task. He had to personally develop the perfect Superman serum to officially activate the system and unlock the Superman template. Is this even a task for a human? Fortunately, Gilchang was also a ruthless man. Since he didn't have superpowers, he would rely on his brain. Relying on his strength as a Beijing doctoral student in his past life, he fought his way into MIT and became the prize student of the one-armed Dr. Connors. Using Dr. Connors' equipment, along with the occasional clues about the Golden Sentinels, remaining manuscripts provided by the system, Gilchang spent a full 4 years in this sunless laboratory. As soon as I inject this, I'll be a god among men. Gilchang looked at the test tube in his hand, his eyes burning. He hadn't been idle during these 4 years. Besides doing scientific research, he had also done something big. Relying on having read Marvel and his foresight of the plot. Just as that playboy Tony Stark returned from an Afghanistan cave and announced the closure of the weapons manufacturing division, causing Stark Industries stock to plummet, Gilchang went all in with his entire net worth, buying the dip like crazy. And then, he sold it off and made a fortune, instantly becoming a billionaire. He even splurged $100 million to buy a penthouse duplex in Manhattan, with even the decorations being top of the line. In the future, he could be a bit closer to the sun than others when sunbathing. With the power of Superman, whether it's Thanos or Odin, they'll all have to call me ancestor when we meet. Gilchang no longer hesitated. Gritting his teeth, he plunged the thick needle directly into his carotid artery. Injection. The golden liquid instantly flooded his blood vessels. The next second, a heart-wrenching pain swept through his entire body, as if every cell was being torn apart and reorganized. Hiss. This is a bit intense. Gilchang's vision went black, and he almost passed out. This feeling was like being slammed on the ground 100 times by the Hulk as if he were Loki. He didn't know how long had passed, maybe a moment, maybe a century. Just as Gilchang thought he would become the first transmigrator to die of pain from injecting serum, that heavenly voice finally rang in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the prerequisite task, developing the Superman serum. Ding! Superman template Man of Steel version activated. The pain receded like the tide. Replacing it was an unprecedented sense of immense power. Gilchang snapped his eyes open and sprang up from the experimental table. Crack crack. The bones all over his body popped like firecrackers. He looked down. His original height of 1.8 meters had shot up to 2 meters, his white coat was stretched tight, and his muscle lines were distinct, as perfect as a Greek sculpture. Most importantly, Gilchang glanced down at his crotch. Good heavens, was this a second puberty? With this size, he probably wouldn't have to worry about finding a girlfriend in the future. He might even have to worry about whether the girlfriend would break. Holy Superman. Not only that, his brain was also crystal clear at this moment, his thinking speed incredibly fast. Gilchang clenched his fists, feeling the power within him that seemed capable of crushing a building, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up wildly. It's set. This time, it's completely set. Ding. Newbie hint. Please expose the host to sunlight as soon as possible to activate the full Superman template abilities. Hey, sunbathing, right. Without a second thought, Gilchang kicked open the heavy security door of the laboratory. Boom. The iron door, weighing several tons, flew out like paper and embedded itself directly into the opposite wall. Gilchang strode out of the underground room and rushed toward the surface. However, when he pushed open the door to the surface, prepared to welcome the bright sunlight and a wonderful billionaire life, what met his eyes was a scene straight out of the apocalypse. Rumble. The sound of massive explosions was deafening. In the sky, a massive blue portal was open, and countless alien aircraft, like flies, came whistling out. There were screams everywhere, and the fire of war was everywhere. There were even several massive leviathan beasts, looking like giant mantis shrimp, weaving between skyscrapers and smashing building after building. This is. Gil Chong was stunned for a moment, then immediately realized. This is 2012, the Battle of New York. He had been cooped up in the underground room for too long and had actually forgotten about this. Before he could even lament the start of the plot. In the distance, a leviathan beast swung its massive body and slammed hard into a skyscraper in the center of Manhattan. That was. Gil Chang's pupils suddenly shrank. That was his penthouse apartment. Boom. The moment the building was hit, the glass curtain wall on the top floor shattered, and that iconic sky pool directly turned into a waterfall. The corner of Gil Chang's mouth twitched. That was $100 million he spent. That's a full $100 million for that luxury penthouse. He hadn't even had the chance to bring a Hollywood actress back for a role in the hay. It's just gone like that. Holy sh*t. My $100 million. Gil Chong couldn't hold it together. An unnamed rage instantly rushed to the top of his head. Your mother, pay me back. You alien scum, fight your war if you want, but why tear down my house? Gil Chong no longer hesitated. The ground beneath his feet instantly shattered, and he soared into the sky like a cannonball. He spread his arms, forming a large star shape in the air. The golden sunlight poured onto his body without reservation. Every cell was like a starving ghost, crazily devouring the energy of the sun. A warm current surged through his body, and his power exploded exponentially. Ding! Yellow star radiation detected. Charging. Charging progress 10%, 50%, 100%. Congratulations to the host. The Superman template Man of Steel version is fully activated. Host. John Gilchang. Abilities. Man of Steel Nuclear Level Defense Heat Vision 5500 degrees Celsius Super Flight Mach 100 Super Strength 10,000 tons. Popularity points. Popularity points can be obtained by gaining the admiration, gratitude, and other emotions of others. Popularity points can be used to increase the upper limits of various attributes. Looking at the introduction on the system panel, Gil Chong raised an eyebrow. Popularity points. Make me play the superhero. This is simply wonderful. Although he was thinking about how to do whatever he wanted in this world, who says I can't be a superhero just because I don't eat beef? As long as he smiles brightly enough in front of the public and strikes ruthlessly enough, then he is the one true God. This is the Homelander way of living. I can do whatever I want. A Chitauri individual flight craft recklessly charged over, firing a volley of energy bolts at Gil Chong, who was floating in the air. Bang bang bang. The energy bolts hit Gil Chong, but didn't even leave a red mark. It didn't even feel like a mosquito bite. Gil Chong slowly lowered his head, looking coldly at that ugly alien. In his eyes, red light began to gather frantically. It was you pieces of trash who destroyed my home. Sizzle. 2 crimson high-energy heat vision beams instantly erupted. Without any obstruction, that aircraft, along with the Chitauri soldiers on it, blew into fragments in the air. Not even a scrap was left. On the ground, the crowd that was originally screaming and fleeing saw this scene and were all dumbfounded. Oh my God, who is that? Is he here to save us? Ding. Extreme shock and admiration from the surrounding public detected. Popularity points plus 22. Ding. Popularity points plus 35. Gil Chong suspended in the smoke, looking at the chaotic New York below and 2 aircraft piloted by Chitauri soldiers, a terrifyingly kind smile appeared on his face. Red light burst from his eyes. So you're the ones called Chitauri, huh? All of you, die for your grandpa. Sizzle. 2 crimson beams of heat vision, like the scythe of the god of death, swept across the sky in an arc. 2 more Chitauri flyers, darting about like flies, exploded in midair, turning into 2 brilliant fireballs. Ding. Extreme shock and worship from the surrounding public detected. Popularity points plus 25. Ding. Popularity points plus 25. Only 50 points. The lives of these alien scumbags are worth way too little. Gil Chong hovered in midair, looking down at his white lab coat. The originally loose lab coat was now stretched tight against his bulging muscles. He looked just like a hunk in a small t-shirt at the gym, exuding a sense of violent aesthetic. As the wind blew, the hem of his coat fluttered, giving off the faint vibe of a cape. At that moment, Gil Chang's newly acquired supervision sharply caught a scene hundreds of meters away. A dust-covered New York police officer stood in the middle of the street, waving his arms frantically and shouting at the top of his lungs, directing panicked citizens into the subway station. "Quick, don't push. This way." The police officer's voice was hoarse from shouting, yet he failed to notice something in the low sky 100 meters behind him. A Chidori soldier was zooming in on a flyer, the dark muzzle of its energy cannon already locked onto his back. "Oh, an opportunity to farm points. Ahem, save someone, delivered right to my door. How can I miss this?" A sharp glint flashed in Gil Chang's eyes. Boom! A visible white shockwave exploded in the air. Gil Chang's figure vanished instantly, leaving behind only an afterimage and the delayed roar of a sonic boom. On the ground, the police officer had just ushered a little girl into the subway entrance when he turned around and saw a blur. Thud! With a dull thud, the asphalt road instantly cracked. A tall, blond man in a tight white lab coat stood abruptly before him, appearing like a god descending from the heavens. The police officer's heart nearly stopped in fright. He instinctively reached for his gun, but upon seeing the person was human, he immediately shouted in anxiety. "Hey, sir, are you crazy? This is a combat zone. Hide, quickly, you'll die standing in the middle of the road." As the police officer shouted, he rushed forward to push away the man he thought was frozen in fear. However, Gil Chang simply stood his ground, even flashing a standard, eight-toothed, kind, smile. "Don't worry, officer. Watch out." The police officer's pupils dilated suddenly as he saw a ghostly blue energy bolt firing from behind the man. It was too late. Boom! The high-energy blast, powerful enough to blow up a police car, slammed squarely into Gil Chang's back. The massive explosion instantly drowned out everything nearby. Flames and dust billowed into the sky, completely swallowing the tall figure. No! The police officer fell to his knees in despair, his face filled with grief. He had watched with his own eyes as this man took the blast for him. It was a certain death strike. The citizens who hadn't dispersed yet also let out terrified screams, some even covered their eyes, unable to bear the sight. However, the next second, the dust cleared. The grief on the police officer's face froze, replaced by horror and shock. The man was still standing firmly in place, not having moved even an inch. He lightly patted out the small flames still flickering on his back, the movement as nonchalant as brushing a speck of dust off his shoulder. Forget being injured. Even the white lab coat wasn't burned through, just scorched a bit. How is this possible? The police officer muttered to himself, his worldview shattered. Screech. While everyone was still in shock, the Chidori soldier who had ambushed them swooped in low on its flyer, screeching as if to deliver a finishing blow. "Watch out, it's coming," someone yelled in terror. Gil Chang didn't even turn his head. He just tilted his ear slightly, listening to the sound of something cutting through the air behind him, a disdainful sneer curling his lips. Humorous. Just as the Chidori soldier was about to crash into the back of his head. Without even looking, Gil Chang swung his hand back. Boom! A terrifying gust of wind from his fist, like a tangible air cannon, blasted backward instantly. The metal alien flyer shattered in midair as if it had slammed into an invisible wall of steel. The Chidori soldier didn't even have time to scream before being vibrated into a puddle of mush. But he wasn't done yet. Gil Chang slowly turned around, his eyes narrowing slightly. Sizzle! Two laser-thin beams of heat vision shot out with precision, instantly vaporizing the falling wreckage so that not even a scrap hit the ground. He wouldn't allow such ugly trash to exist on this clean street. The entire area fell into a deathly silence. Everyone stood with their mouths agape, staring blankly at this man who seemed like both a god and a demon. Even if Iron Man had flown by nearby, he might not have delivered such a shocking visual impact. The pressure and awe brought by such pure physical strength were simply too overwhelming. Ding! Popularity points from Extreme Shock +50. Ding! Popularity points from Extreme Worship +50. Ding! Popularity points +50. Hearing the pleasant notifications in his mind, the anger in Gil Chang's heart finally dissipated a bit. This is the life. Are you Superman? The police officer stood up tremblingly, looking at Gil Chang with a voice full of awe. He had never seen any of the Avengers' tank and energy cannon with their bare body and swat away aliens like flies. Gil Chang turned around, the coldness on his face vanishing instantly. It was replaced by a smile that was bright, righteous, and as refreshing as a spring breeze. He even thoughtfully straightened the police officer's crooked tie. Superman, a nice name. However, Gil Chang slightly puffed out his chest, a symbol of power, as he looked around at the citizens filming with their phones, his voice gentle yet powerful. I still prefer you call me Homelander. It's safe here now. Everyone, please evacuate in an orderly manner. With that, Gil Chang didn't linger. Because his supervision had already spotted something on the roof of a building a few blocks away. That mortal agent with the bow and arrows was being besieged by a group of Chidori like a rabbit being hunted. That was a member of the Avengers. How many popularity points would saving him get? This is the responsibility of Homelander. Gil Chang thought slyly to himself, then slightly bent his knees. Boom! The ground instantly caved in, forming a half-meter deep crater. He turned into a streak of white light and soared into the sky, accompanied by a deafening sonic boom. Wow, so cool. Look, Mom, it's Homelander. He's even faster than Iron Man. God bless Homelander. Countless exclamations and cheers from the public echoed behind him. Ding. Popularity points plus 50. Ding. Popularity points plus 50. In midair, hearing those cheers, Gil Chang's grin almost reached his ears. Yes, exactly like this. Cheer to your heart's content, you lovely little popularity babies. A few blocks away, on the roof of an office building, Hawkeye Clint Barton was in an extremely frantic state. He even wanted to curse. As the only ADC in the Avengers, he felt like he was under even more pressure than the Hulk. The Hulk was only responsible for smashing things, but he had to calculate wind speed and angles for every single arrow. Swish! An explosive arrow accurately blew a passing Chidori craft into fireworks. Barton skillfully reached back for his quiver. He felt nothing. Shit! Barton cursed under his breath, cold sweat dripping down his forehead and cheeks. The worst-case scenario had happened. Out of mana, no, out of arrows. And just then, it was as if God were playing a joke on him. ZZZTZZZTZZZT. At the edge of the roof, 3 Chidori soldiers in dull armor, looking like giant mantis shrimp spirits, crawled up holding energy spears. The dark muzzles instantly locked onto the unarmed Barton. Well, this is going to be lively. Barton gave a bitter smile and tightened his grip on his compound bow. Although he was an archer, hitting people with a bow was also a required skill. Just as he was about to switch to melee mode on the rooftop. Boom! A violent sonic boom suddenly exploded overhead. The sound was so loud it made Barton's eardrums ache, and even the 3 Chidori soldiers were startled into a pause. Immediately after, a dark figure, as if teleporting, hovered 3 meters above Barton's head out of thin air. Barton reflexively looked up. He saw a man in a white lab coat, with a physique that would make even Captain America feel ashamed, floating effortlessly in the air with his arms crossed. The white lab coat fluttering in the wind was somehow worn with the aura of Superman's cape. Gil Chang looked down at the disheveled Barton, a signature, refreshing smile on his face. Hi, Mr. Agent. It looks like you've run into some minor trouble here. Barton was completely stunned. He opened his mouth wide, even forgetting that there were 3 aliens in front of him. Fly, he's flying. This person has no thrusters, no iron suit, he's just flying out of thin air. This isn't scientific. Roar. The 3 Chidori clearly didn't have the mood to admire a handsome guy. They let out a strange cry and instantly raised their muzzles, aiming at Gil Chang in the air. Watch out! Barton shouted instinctively. However, Gil Chang didn't even blink. He just turned his head slightly, and those deep eyes instantly turned crimson, as if they contained 2 miniature suns. It's a bit noisy here, I'll help you quiet it down. ZZZZT. 2 beams of high-energy heat vision instantly erupted, like a red-hot blade cutting through butter. There was no suspense at all. The 3 Chidori soldiers didn't even let out a scream before their upper bodies were directly melted by the high-energy lasers. Only 3 pairs of legs remained standing, the cuts charred black and smelling of roasted meat. An instant kill. This is the dominance of a max-level account in a starter village. The red light in Gil Chang's eyes gradually faded. He spread his hands and smiled at the dumbfounded Barton. See. Threat eliminated. Ding. Detected shock and gratitude from Avenger Hawkeye. Popularity points plus 100. Listening to the system prompt, the satisfaction in Gil Chang's heart was even better than drinking an ice-cold Coke. Barton swallowed hard, looking at the 3 smoking corpses, then at Gil Chang floating in the air. This kind of power was simply outrageous. Who are you? Barton asked in astonishment. You can fly, and you can shoot lasers from your eyes. Are you Superman? This world has DC Comics, so he instinctively thought of Superman. Gil Chang slowly landed on the roof, flicked his lab coat, and struck a perfect pose. He extended a finger and shook it gently. Superman, the guy who wears his underwear on the outside. No, 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 Mr. Agent. Although our abilities are quite similar. Gil Chang puffed out his chest, the smile on his face sunny and confident, as if he were the incarnation of justice. But you can call me Homelander. Homelander, Barton murmured to himself, memorizing the name deep in his mind. Just then, Clint, are you okay? An anxious female voice came. Natasha Romanoff, the famous Black Widow. She was piloting a stolen Chidori craft, docking it clumsily at the edge of the roof. She was also in a mess, her bodysuit covered in dust. I'm fine, Nat, but... Barton was about to explain. Natasha had already jumped down and said very quickly. No time to explain, we have to get to Stark Tower. Loki is there, we must find a way to close the portal. However, before she could finish. Hiss. 2 Chidori soldiers that had slipped through the net appeared from nowhere, brandishing energy blades and lunging insidiously at the defenseless Black Widow from behind. Natasha, behind you. Barton roared in terror. Natasha was startled. It was too late to turn and defend. At that critical moment, a sneak attack right in front of me. Where are your manners? A magnetic voice rang in Natasha's ear. Immediately after, a gust of wind blew past. Bang. A dull thud, like the sound of a watermelon being smashed by a hammer. Natasha only felt a warmth on her face, as if some liquid had splashed on her. She turned around, her pupils shrinking instantly. She saw the mysterious man in the white lab coat standing behind her, holding a punching pose. And on the wall not far from him, the 2 attacking Chidori had disappeared. Replacing them was a large smear of red and green, mosaic, on the wall, slowly sliding down. Simple, brutal, 1 punch into mush, not even a chance for medical attention. Dead silence. Natasha touched the unknown liquid splashed on her face, completely dazed. As a top shield agent, she had seen the Hulk smash people and Thor use lightning. But this pure, no-frills aesthetic of violence still made her scalp crawl. Ding. Detected extreme shock from Black Widow, popularity points plus 150. Ding. Detected a second shock from Hawkeye, popularity points plus 80. Gil Chang retracted his fist and flicked the blood off his hand with disgust. He pulled out a handkerchief, wiped his hands elegantly, and then turned to look at the still dazed Natasha. He gave that signature, reassuring smile. Beautiful lady, if such a lovely face were to be injured, it would be a loss to the world. Natasha snapped out of it, looking warily at this dangerous man, her hand quietly reaching for the taser at her waist. Although she knew it was likely useless. Who are you? That, Superman. Natasha asked the same question as Barton. Gil Chang sighed helplessly. What's with this batch of Avengers? Why is their head full of Superman? Did they pay the copyright fees? No, ma'am. Gil Chang floated up slightly, looking down from above, his white lab coat snapping in the wind like a deity descending to the mortal realm. I am Homelander. Remember this name. After speaking, he ignored the 2 agents who were still processing the information. Because his super hearing had already captured that flamboyant scream coming from the distance. A few kilometers away, Tony Stark was piloting the somewhat damaged Mark V, being chased by dozens of Chidori craft like a dog. Jarvis, I think we're in trouble. Sir, power is at 30%. Suggest evasive maneuvers. A playful smile tugged at the corner of Gil Chang's mouth. Oh, the rich guy is in trouble. That's flying popularity points. How could he miss such a good chance to farm points? Boom. The concrete ground beneath his feet instantly shattered. Gil Chang turned into an afterimage, pulling a white vapor trail in the air as he headed straight for Stark Tower, leaving only Natasha and Barton bewildered in the wind. Homelander, Natasha murmured, where on earth did this guy come from? No idea. Barton picked up an alien energy gun from the ground and gave a bitter laugh. But I have a feeling this guy is on our side. Above Manhattan, the flames of war were everywhere. Tony Stark felt terrible right now. Truly, it was worse than the time Pepper found out he had bought that entire cabinet of strawberry donuts. Sir, 12 enemy aircraft are locked on at your 6 o'clock. Immediate evasion is advised. Jarvis's calm voice rang out inside the helmet. I know, I see them. Tony gritted his teeth as the Mark V performed an incredibly thrilling Cobra maneuver in midair. ZZZZT, ZZZZT, ZZZZT. Several beams of eerie blue energy grazed his paintwork, exploding into sparks on the glass of the nearby Stark Tower. Damn it, are these alien flies endless? Tony looked at the dense cluster of red dots on the radar, fine beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. His repulsor energy had already dropped to the warning line, and only 2 micro-missiles remained. If he didn't find a way to shake his tail soon, tomorrow's New York Times headline would likely be, Billionaire dies tragically in the streets, Iron Man becomes scrap metal man. Jarvis, find me a shortcut, preferably one that only has room for me. Tony shouted as he dove at high speed, hugging the glass curtain wall of a building. He was gambling that these alien scum weren't as good at flying as he was. Boom. Tony piloted the armor at an incredibly tricky angle. Using the blind spot of a building's corner, he fired 2 backhand repulsor blasts, accurately blowing up the 2 closest pursuing craft. Ha, see that, now that's skill. Tony was just about to breathe a sigh of relief. However, the next second, his expression froze. Because after the smoke cleared, 5 Chitauri flyers were still stuck to his tail like leeches. And they were even closer. He could even see the hideous grins on those alien freaks' faces. Okay, I take it back. Looks like luck isn't on my side today. Tony took a deep breath, preparing for a desperate final stand. Just then, a white figure appeared extremely abruptly in his right field of vision. There was no roar of thrusters, nor any disturbance in the air. Like a ghost, he appeared out of thin air. Tony instinctively turned to look, his pupils dilating in shock. It was a man wearing a tight white lab coat with an incredibly fit physique. He was just flying through the air with his hands behind his back, his body parallel to the ground. He maintained an extremely elegant, even lazy, posture while flying. The most ridiculous part was, his speed was actually perfectly synchronized with the Mark V at full thrust. Even as Tony accelerated, decelerated, or turned, the man stayed right beside him like a sticker, motionless. The two made eye contact through the golden red faceplate. The man even turned his head and gave Tony an incredibly bright, sunny, standard 8-tooth smile. Hey, Tin Man, if you don't watch where you're going to hit that billboard up ahead. What the F? Tony was so startled his hands twitched, causing the armor to jerk violently, nearly crashing into the building ahead. Who are you? Which lab did you escape from? Or are you some new shield weapon? Tony instinctively raised his repulsor, locking onto the weirdo beside him. This wasn't scientific. This completely violated the laws of aerodynamics. He could fly without any thrusters. And he could keep up with an armor cruising at supersonic speeds. Sir, scans indicate the target as a human male containing extremely high energy reactions, but he has not shown any hostility. There was a hint of unmistakable confusion in Jarvis's voice as well. Gil Chang looked at the repulsor pointed at him and didn't get angry. He just raised an eyebrow slightly, his smile remaining kind and charming. Don't be nervous, Mr. Stark. I'm here to help you. It looks like you've encountered some, well, trash you can't seem to clean up. As Gil Chang spoke, his gaze moved past Tony to the 5 Chitauri flyers behind him. In that instant, Tony felt as if the surrounding air had frozen. The smile in the man's eyes vanished instantly, replaced by 2 beams of extremely violent, crimson light. Watch. Gil Chong calmly uttered the word. Zeet. 2 red rays, as hot as lava and as straight as lasers, instantly erupted from his eyes. The red light was so dazzling it even outshone the midday sun. Without any warning or charging up, the moment the 5 pursuing Chidori flyers touched the red light, they were like snowflakes hitting a red-hot iron. Even the process of exploding was skipped. They were directly sliced, melted, and vaporized. Boom, 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 boom. 5 massive fireballs erupted simultaneously in midair, forming a brilliant display of deathly fireworks. And against the backdrop of the sky full of fire, the man in the white lab coat remained in his posture with his hands behind his back, not even a corner of his clothes ruffled. It was as if he had just casually swatted a few flies. My God. On the ground, the citizens who had been screaming and fleeing all stopped in their tracks, staring blankly up at the sky. Who is that? It's that man in white. I saw it too, he shot lasers from his eyes. Is he a god come to save us? Ding. Iron Man Tony Stark is extremely shocked. Popularity points plus 200. Ding. New York City residents are extremely worshipful. Popularity points plus 25. Ding. Popularity points plus 25. Listening to the wonderful notification sounds, the red light in Gil Chang's eyes slowly faded. He turned his head to look at Tony, who had completely lost control of his facial expressions seen via supervision, and the corner of his mouth curled into that signature smile again. How's that? Much quieter now. Tony Stark felt like his brain was short-circuiting. He looked at the falling debris and then at the man floating in front of him. Who are you? Superman. The one from the comics. Tony couldn't help but blurt out. The cape, though it was a lab coat, the heat vision, the flight. Wasn't this that Kryptonian who wore his underwear on the outside? Gil Chong sighed helplessly. Superman again. Can't these people be a bit more original? No, Mr. Stark. Gil Chong extended a finger and wagged it gently, his tone carrying a hint of unquestionable arrogance and confidence. I am Homelander. Remember, it's Homelander. Homelander. Tony chewed on the name, a glint flashing in his eyes. All right, Homelander. Whoever you are, you just stole my thunder. I was saving those 5 for an experiment. Despite his stubborn words, Tony's tense muscles clearly relaxed. Right now, whoever he was, as long as he was fighting aliens, he was an ally. Shortly after, the two flew one after the other across several blocks, arriving above Park Avenue. The streets below were a mess. And the culprit behind it all, Loki, was standing on a Chidori individual flyer. He was waving the Mind Stone, directing more alien soldiers to destroy the city. Is that the reindeer with the long horns? Gil Chong looked down at Loki. He didn't make a move, instead gesturing toward Tony. Tony didn't hesitate. With thrusters at full blast, he dove down and landed steadily in front of Loki. All weapon systems were active, locked onto Loki's big head. Even a tourist should know to follow the rules when visiting someone else's turf. Tony opened his faceplate, and his sharp tongue started firing off again. Put down the weapon in your hand. Surrender now. Loki looked at the Iron Man before him, an elegant yet wicked smile appearing on his face. Surrender. To whom? To you ants. Wow, it looks like your horns didn't just poke your brain, they messed up your hearing too. Tony even spread his hands in a mock relaxed gesture. How about I buy you a drink? Right over there at the top of Stark Tower. We can discuss your fashion sense while we're at it. Honestly, those 2 horns are really redundant. There's no way to style them. Loki's smile turned cold. He hated it most when people made fun of his helmet. You will pay for your insolence, mortal. Loki waved his scepter. Whoosh. A blue energy bolt instantly shot toward Tony. Tony was prepared and easily dodged it with a sidestep. But he didn't counterattack. Instead, he intentionally let the energy bolt's aftershock graze his chest armor, causing a puff of black smoke. Oh, damn it, my armor. Tony cried out exaggeratedly, then, as if frightened, turned around and flew toward Stark Tower. Trying to run, Loki wasn't about to let go of the mortal who had insulted him and gave chase on his flyer. Watching the 2 disappear among the skyscrapers in a game of cat and mouse. Gil Chong, floating in midair, let a meaningful smile curl on his lips. That's it. Led him away. This stage is mine now. He looked down at the dense, rampaging Chidori army below. And at the crying, desperate citizens of New York. In his eyes, how was that a disaster scene? It was clearly a massive harvest field for popularity points. Since Iron Man is gone, then. Gil Chong straightened his collar, the smile on his face becoming even more brilliant, a smile unique to Homelander, full of a desire to perform. Now, it's Homelander's showtime. The streets of Manhattan had now completely turned into a living hell. Ruins and debris were everywhere, and the sound of crying and screaming filled the air. Run, run that way, don't look back. A group of citizens, cornered by the flames of war, fled frantically through the ruins like a frightened flock of sheep. And behind them, screech, a squad of Chitauri soldiers brandished energy spears, letting out hair-raising, eerie screeches. Like cats playing with mice, they were in no hurry to kill, instead relishing the thrill of driving their prey. From time to time, they fired energy beams, blowing up cars near the escapees and triggering bursts of terrified screams. God, someone save us. Mommy, I'm scared. In the crowd, a little girl wearing a purple checkered shirt tripped and fell onto the ground amidst the scramble. She watched in terror as the hideous aliens drew closer, closing her eyes in despair. The two Chitauri soldiers clearly noticed the lone youngling as well. They glanced at each other, cruel smiles appearing on their ugly faces as they raised their spears, the tips glowing with a lethal blue light. At that critical moment, boom, a massive explosion rang out, like a sudden clap of thunder on level ground. The Chitauri soldiers, who were about to pull their triggers, froze in their tracks. They instinctively looked up. Not just them, the despairing citizens nearby also stopped, staring blankly at the sky. A dark shadow, trailing a white sonic boom cloud that tore through the air, crashed down. Thud, the earth shook violently, the concrete pavement instantly shattering as rubble flew everywhere. The dust settled. A man of imposing stature, wearing a white lab coat, stood before the little girl like an insurmountable mountain. Roar! Though the two Chitauri soldiers were startled, they saw that the opponent had no iron armor or shield, he was just an ordinary person in white clothes. Immediately, they flew into a rage from the embarrassment of being startled. These days, any random earthling dares to block the way. Run away, big brother. The little girl sitting on the ground saw this, and even though she was shaking all over from fear, she couldn't help but cry out loudly. They'll kill you. Gil Chong turned his head slightly, glancing at the little girl behind him from the corner of his eye. The corner of his mouth curled into a meaningful arc. Run. In my dictionary, that word doesn't exist. The next second, the two Chitauri soldiers charged forward with eerie cries, their energy spears thrusting down viciously. Gil Chong stood his ground, not moving an inch, not even bothering to lift a hand. Just as the spear tips were only a centimeter away from his eyeballs. His eyes suddenly lit up, as if two red supernovas had erupted in an instant. Two thick beams of heat vision gushed out. There was no suspense. Even their screams were instantly evaporated by the high temperature. The two charging Chitauri soldiers, along with their weapons, exploded directly into a cloud of red blood mist in the air. An instant kill. Not even a scrap remained. The little girl's crying stopped abruptly. Her mouth hung open as she stared blankly at the back of the figure bathed in the blood mist, her small brain completely short-circuiting. Ding. Detected that Kate Bishop is extremely shocked, popularity points +50. Hearing the system's prompt, Gil Chang's heart stirred. Kate Bishop, that rich second-generation girl, the future second Hawkeye. Good grief, did I just intercept Hawkeye's fan? This is a profitable deal. Gil Chong turned around, the coldness on his face instantly switching to that standard smile filled with divine radiance. At the same time, to ensure safety, he decided to slaughter all these Chitauri soldiers first. Sizzle. Gil Chong snapped his head up, his red heat vision acting like the whip of the god of death, sweeping in a circle around him. Boom 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 boom. Within a 100-meter radius, dozens of Chitauri soldiers who were still rampaging, whether on the ground or in the air, were all sliced in half at the waist in that single instant. For a moment, it was as if a green rain was falling over the entire street. That was the blood of the aliens. The street, which had been like a purgatory just moments ago, instantly fell silent. Citizens poked their heads out from behind cover, watching the scene in disbelief. They're all dead just like that. These monsters that had routed the police and military were all gone after being looked at by this man. My God, who is he? A new superhero. So strong. He's even stronger than Thor. Cheers erupted on the street like a tidal wave. Ding. Popularity points plus 25. Ding. Popularity points plus 35. Ding. Popularity points plus 50. Listening to the prompts constantly flooding his mind, Gil Chong felt refreshed all over, even better than getting a full spa treatment. This was the life he wanted. He walked slowly to the little girl sitting on the ground and knelt on one knee, trying to keep his gaze level with hers. At this moment, Kate Bishop's small face was covered in dust and tear stains, but her large eyes sparkled with an unprecedented light. It was a thirst for power, a worship of a hero. Big brother, Kate asked with a trembling voice, are you Superman? Gil Chong reached out and very gently wiped the dust from her face. This action was captured by countless mobile phones held up around them. A perfect public relations image. Gil Chong gave himself a thumbs up in his mind. No, little sister. Gil Chong looked into her eyes, his voice gentle yet firm, reaching across the entire street. I am Homelander. It's no longer safe here. Remember, if you encounter danger again in the future, don't be afraid. Gil Chong stood up, his white lab coat fluttering in the wind like a savior's cape. As long as you call my name, I will appear immediately. Because I am your guardian god. Homelander, Kate murmured to herself, firmly remembering this name and that face with a sunny smile. At this moment, the place that originally belonged to Hawkeye was completely replaced by another, more domineering and powerful figure. Homelander, Homelander. The surrounding crowd began to chant the name. Gil Chong smiled and waved to the crowd, enjoying the stage that belonged to him. But he didn't stay long. Because his supervision had already seen Loki, wearing his green-themed suit, striking a pose atop Stark Tower. Moreover, calculating the time, that nuclear bomb should be about to be shipped, right? That was the main event of the day. Intercepting a nuclear bomb and saving New York. If he let that Tin Man Iron Man do a job that only Superman should do, where would Homelander's pride go? Everyone, please evacuate to a safe area as soon as possible. I'm going to deal with the guy in charge. Gil Chong left those words, then slightly bent his knees. Boom, he turned into a white stream of light, charging straight towards Stark Tower. Watching the departing back, little Kate clenched her fists tightly, her eyes full of stars. So cool. In the future, I want to become a hero just like Big Brother Homelander. Over Manhattan, the air was thick with gunpowder smoke. Are these guys who look like mantis shrimp never ending? Tony Stark, piloting the Mark V, wove through the concrete jungle in a disheveled state. Behind him, a massive Leviathan beast pursued him relentlessly, its abyssal maw wide open. No matter how many miniature missiles he unleashed, it felt like a mere tickle to this thick-skinned interstellar beast. Jarvis, concentrate all power in the chest, burn right through it. Sir, power is at only 12%. Doing so will cause us to lose propulsion. Do as I say. Meanwhile, inside the luxurious hall on the top floor of Stark Tower, Loki, who had just managed to crawl up, hadn't even had time to straighten his slightly crooked horned helmet before he felt the ground shake violently. Thud, a green behemoth smashed through the glass, charging in amidst a shower of debris. It was the Hulk. This guy had just finished dismantling a spaceship alongside Thor. Turning around and finding Thor too talkative, he had backhanded the God of Thunder, sending him flying. Now, he had his sights set on this puny figure holding a scepter. Roar! Hulk let out a roar and, like an out-of-control tank, charged straight at Loki. Enough! Loki finally snapped. As a prince of Asgard and the god of mischief of the Nine Realms, he had endured enough humiliation today. First, he was insulted by that Tin Man, and then he was kicked down the building by that man in the white coat. Now even this green beast dared to roar at him. You lowly ants. I am a god. I will not be bullied by the likes of. Bang! Loki's arrogant speech wasn't even finished. Hulk had already rushed in front of him and grabbed him by the ankle. Immediately following that, it was like slamming a ragged cloth around. Bang! 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 Slammed side to side, the floor was smashed into deep craters as stone fragments flew everywhere. A few seconds later, Hulk tossed him aside casually. Loki lay embedded in the floor like a pile of mud. His eyes were vacant, and he let out a few groans that sounded like a broken bellows. Ugh! Hulk snorted disdainfully and turned to leave, leaving behind only one deafening evaluation. Puny God. At the other end of the battlefield, the situation for the Avengers remained critical. Hawkeye hid behind a billboard, his fingers reaching for his quiver only to find it empty. Captain America was surrounded, the paint on his shield scratched and marred. Even Thor had been blasted into a disheveled state by several Chitauri flyers. The entire team was facing a headwind. Just then, on the helipad atop Stark Tower, Black Widow Natasha was anxiously watching the Tesseract as it continuously spewed energy. Natasha, the scepter. Loki's scepter can penetrate the energy shield. The voice of Dr. Eric, having regained his senses, came through the earpiece. The scepter. Natasha looked around. Where had the scepter fallen during all that chaos? At that moment, a slender yet powerful hand, holding the Mind Stone scepter, was extended toward her. Beautiful lady, I believe you were looking for this. Natasha whipped her head around. She saw the man calling himself Homelander, suspended half a foot off the ground like a deity. His white coat was spotless, and his face wore that signature, unfathomable smile. That composure was completely out of place amidst the hellish scene of war surrounding them. You. Natasha's gaze was complex. Her instincts as an agent told her this man was dangerous, extremely dangerous. But he had indeed just saved her and Barton. Take it. Gil Chong thrust the scepter into Natasha's hand and pointed at the blue pillar of light. Shut it down and save the world. Isn't that what you agents love to do most? What about you? Natasha asked subconsciously. Me. Gil Chong looked up slightly toward the distant sea horizon, the smile on his lips growing more intense. I have something more important to take care of. Natasha didn't understand, but she knew now was not the time for hesitation. She grabbed the scepter and lunged it fiercely toward the energy shield. Sizzle. The once indestructible shield was penetrated by the scepter as if it were thin paper. I can shut it down. Does anyone copy? I can close the portal. Natasha shouted loudly. However, just as she was prepared to completely cut the power source, Tony Stark's anxious and heavy voice suddenly came through the earpiece. No, wait, don't close it yet, Stark, this is our only chance. Captain America's voice cut in as well. There's a nuke coming. Tony's voice carried a hint of finality after desperation. It's going to blow in Manhattan in less than a minute. I know where to put it. As soon as those words were spoken, the movements of all the Avengers froze for a split second. A nuke. That Security Council, in order to eliminate the aliens, had actually decided to wipe out the entire population of millions in New York along with them. Natasha's hand gripping the scepter stiffened as she looked toward the sea in disbelief. And beside her, the smile on Gil Chang's face finally blossomed completely. That kind of smile wasn't for saving the masses, it was the look of a hunter who had finally waited for his fattest prey. It's finally here. His super hearing had long ago captured the scream of that nuclear missile slicing through the air. Even the radiation symbol on the warhead was clear to see under his supervision. Tony Stark wants to play the hero. Wants to sacrifice himself to intercept a nuke. How could I let a highlight moment like this go to you, Tin Man? Gil Chong sneered inwardly. This was a massive amount of popularity points. This nuke, I am definitely intercepting it. Not even Jesus could stop me, I say. In the distance, Tony Stark had already shaken off the Leviathan, his thrusters at full blast. He charged without hesitation toward that rapidly approaching messenger of destruction. Divert all power to the thrusters. Tony roared inside his helmet, prepared for death. However, just then, boom, atop Stark Tower, the air suddenly exploded. A white figure, almost impossible to track with the naked eye, instantly pulled a long sonic boom cloud in front of him. That speed was several times faster than the Mark V at full flight. Tony only felt a blur before his eyes. That fellow calling himself Homelander was like a bolt of white lightning, surpassing him in an instant. Gil Chong flew at extreme speeds, the fierce wind blowing his hair back to reveal eyes full of ambition and fanaticism. He glanced back at Iron Man, who had been left far behind, and even had the leisure to perform a barrel roll in midair. Sorry, Stark, saving the world is something a professional like me should do. You should just go back and hug your pepper. The next second, Gil Chang's speed surged again, leaving more sonic boom clouds in his wake. His target was precisely that nuclear missile capable of destroying all of New York. Tony Stark felt as if he had been hit head-on by a high-speed train traveling at full velocity. Even though it was just the wake left behind by that person's flight. The tragic sense of preparing for death was instantly scattered to the winds by this unreasonable gale. Jarvis, tell me what the hell is that? Tony struggled to steady himself in the air, his eyes behind the faceplate widening like copper bells. His pride and joy, the Mark V, looked as slow as an old lady with a cane in front of that white figure. Sir, according to the Doppler effect analysis. Jarvis's voice even carried a hint of electrical trembling, as if his processors were about to burn out. The target's speed has exceeded Mach 100. In conversion, that is approximately 122,500 kilometers per hour. And he is still accelerating. Mach 100. Are you kidding me? Is this a speed achievable within the atmosphere? Shouldn't the frictional heat have turned him into ash by now? Is he even human? Tony couldn't help but swear. He looked at the light dot on the radar that was practically teleporting, and a deep sense of powerlessness welled up in his heart. Is he really not a star destroyer wearing human skin? Meanwhile, inside the Helicarrier command center, Nick Fury's perpetually dark face was even darker now. He stared fixedly at the white trail tearing through the clouds on the big screen. Just half a minute ago, he was still worrying about the nuclear missile sent by the government. Now, he had another weirdo in a white coat to worry about. Director, that's, Agent Hill's voice was wavering. I don't know yet, I only know this guy calls himself Homelander. Nick Fury stared at the real-time surveillance feed and said in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with doubt, confusion, and shock. 10,000 meters in the air. The gale roared in Gil Chang's ears, yet it couldn't move a single strand of his hair. The bioelectric field trampled all physical rules underfoot. In almost the blink of an eye, the nuclear missile painted with danger symbols appeared in his field of vision. It was spewing tail flames, carrying the mission of destroying millions of people, charging toward Manhattan without looking back. So this is the nuclear missile, known as humanity's strongest weapon. Gil Chang maintained a speed parallel to the missile. He turned his head, as if examining a crude toy. Too slow. It's just too slow. Gil Chang shook his head. Originally, he intended to push this thing into the portal. But that posture wasn't cool enough. If it wasn't cool enough, how could he harvest the screams and worship of the masses? How could he live up to the style of Homelander? Suddenly, an extremely bold, even crazy idea popped into his head. Since I'm delivering a package, I might as well do it with style. The corners of Gil Chang's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a domineering smile. The next second, his figure flickered. He appeared directly on top of the nuclear missile. He didn't use his hands to push. Gil Chang's feet stepped firmly onto the smooth body of the nuclear missile. The bioelectric field instantly enveloped this restless destroyer, forcibly taming it. Go! Gil Chang kept his hands behind his back, his white lab coat fluttering loudly behind him. He rode the nuclear missile like a legendary sword immortal. No, he was a missile-riding Homelander. This scene, through the cameras of countless news media near Stark Tower, was instantly broadcasted to the whole world. What the? On the roof of Stark Tower, Hawkeye, who had just pulled out an arrow and was about to change positions to shoot, dropped his bow directly on the ground. His eyes widened as if he were seeing a god descending to Earth. Natasha, you have to tell me I'm seeing things. That guy, he's flying on a nuclear missile. Beside him, Black Widow Natasha's red lips were slightly parted, unable to close for a long time. As a top agent, she had undergone professional training. No matter how funny or shocking something was, she wouldn't lose her composure. Unless she couldn't help it. Clint, I think we should consider retirement. Natasha murmured to herself. She looked at the figure standing with hands behind his back on the nuclear missile, feeling that her entire worldview had been shattered today. This is Homelander. This is a god, not far away. Thunder god Thor, who had just used lightning to kill a Leviathan, was about to raise his hammer for a pose. As a result, he looked up and saw Gil Chang's heroic posture of riding the missile. Heimdall above. Thor's hand holding Mjolnir tightened, a hint of competitive fighting spirit flashing in his eyes, but it was mostly shock. This mortal can fly. Fine, but what is he doing flying on that big thing? As for on the ground, Captain America Steve Rogers, who was protecting a family of 3 with his shield. He was currently looking up at the sky. The hand holding the shield was trembling slightly. Howard's hover car back then wasn't even this fast. The captain felt like he was truly getting old. Has this era gone so crazy that humans can fly on nuclear missiles? Ding. Detected Tony Stark's worldview collapsing. Popularity points plus 200. Ding. Detected Thor Odinson questioning life. Popularity points plus 200. Ding. Detected Black Widow's extreme shock. Popularity points plus 200. Ding. Explosive growth in public worship. Popularity points plus 10086. Listening to the notification sounds in his mind ringing like a slot machine spitting out coins. The smile on Gil Chang's face became even more brilliant. Refreshing. So refreshing. This is the treatment a transmigrator should have. He intentionally controlled the speed of the missile, not teleporting directly into the portal. Instead, he maintained a perfect speed that allowed the ground to see his heroic posture while still being able to send it away before the missile exploded. What do you call this? This is called professional stage management. Gil Chang looked down at the city beneath his feet. Supervision activated. Even from 10,000 meters in the air, he clearly saw the expressions on everyone's faces on the ground. Shock, worship, fanaticism, fear. This is the authority brought by power. Suddenly, Gil Chang's gaze swept over an old apartment building in Queens. Behind a window on the 3rd floor, a young boy wearing black-rimmed glasses, looking only about 10 years old. He was holding an old-fashioned film camera, his face flushed and trembling with excitement as he pressed the shutter toward the sky. That's Gil Chang's heart stirred. A young Peter Parker, the future Spider-Man. Man, I can even run into him here. Gil Chang was in a great mood. Since it's the future little Spidey, I'll give you a close-up. In high-speed flight, Gil Chang slightly turned his head. Even across a distance of several kilometers, he accurately locked onto that tiny lens. Then, he revealed a standard, kindly smile filled with Homelander-style fatherly glory. He even playfully winked his left eye. Click. Little Peter pressed the shutter, so excited he almost threw the camera away. He saw me. Superman saw me. Aunt May, Uncle Ben, look, that's Superman. At this moment, a seed named worship was deeply planted in the heart of a future superhero. However, whether this seed would grow into the righteous Spider-Man or a dark Homelander Spidey was hard to say. Having done all this, Gil Chang withdrew his gaze and looked toward the deep blue wormhole overhead. That was deep space, the location of the Chitauri mothership. All right, showtime is over. Now, it's fireworks time. Gil Chang's gaze turned cold, and he suddenly exerted force with his feet. Boom. Bioelectric field at full power. The nuclear missile seemed to have been fitted with a level 10 thruster, its speed skyrocketing again. He rode the weapon that represented destruction. Turning into a bolt of white lightning surging upward, he charged into the portal without hesitation. This scene was frozen in the eyes of countless people around the world. That figure in white became the most indelible mark of this day, and even this century. He really is on our side. At the top of Stark Tower, Tony Stark looked at the figure disappearing into the portal, his tone somewhat complex. The moment he passed through the portal, the clamorous noise of the battlefield was instantly cut off. Stepping on the nuclear missile, Gil Chang plunged headfirst into this deep, cold expanse of outer space. If it were an ordinary person, their blood would have boiled in an instant. Lungs would burst like balloons, and eyeballs would bulge out. But Gil Chang only blinked. He even subconsciously held his breath. 3 seconds later, phew, Gil Chang tentatively released that breath and even opened his mouth to give a silent, wide laugh. He was fine. Absolutely nothing was wrong. The feeling was like returning to the womb. The surroundings were filled with radiation and energy that made him feel comfortable. Is this the Kryptonian constitution? Is this what it feels like to be a god among men? Gil Chang felt so good he even wanted to go for a swim in space. Ding! Congratulations to the host for entering space with your physical body for the first time. Achievement unlocked. Interstellar beginning. Extra reward. Flight speed increased to Mach 150. Cumulative popularity points have exceeded 20,000 points. Reward obtained. 1 ability enhancement. The system's prompt sounded at the perfect time, adding fuel to his excitement. Gil Chong glanced at the status panel. Holy cow, his speed had increased by another Mach 50. This was awesome. As for the enhancement, was there even a choice? Since he was going to be the Homelander and since he wasn't going to take any crap in this world, then he must have a pair of eyes that could make someone pregnant with just a glance. Oh no, eyes that could melt people. System, max out my heat vision. Ding. Enhancement successful. Heat vision temperature increased to 6,500 degrees Celsius. 6,500 degrees. Good lord, that's higher than the temperature of the sun's surface. Gil Chong felt a heat in both eyes, as if they contained 2 active volcanoes about to erupt. Just then, hiss, hiss, hiss. Although he couldn't hear any sound, Gil Chang's supervision clearly saw it. Countless Chidori flying soldiers were swarming around him in dense numbers. In the distance, several huge Chidori starships, like floating islands, were slowly turning their cannons. Those eerie blue energy cannons were charging up, aimed directly at Gil Chong. Floating in the vacuum, Gil Chong watched these insects who didn't know whether to live or die, his brow furrowing slightly. He cursed in his heart. What a bunch of trash with no sense of judgment. Perfect, I'll use you to test out my new temperature. Gil Chong lowered his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. The next second, vroom, 2 golden red beams instantly shot out. He whipped his head around in space, his gaze sweeping 180 degrees. There was no sound, only images of annihilation. Every Chidori, aircraft, or even small meteorite struck by this gaze. Even the process of explosion was skipped. They were directly vaporized into nothingness by the terrifying high temperature. A massive area was cleared in one sweep. It was as clean and efficient as using an eraser to wipe away smudges on a piece of paper. Awesome, Gil Chong roared in his heart. This is power. This is Superman. However, just as he struck a pose, waiting for the flood of popularity points notifications. 1 second, 2 seconds. The system was quiet, not even letting out a peep. Gil Chong was stunned. He looked back at the small, blue portal opening behind him. Then he looked at the pitch-black abyss of space. Suddenly, he realized an extremely serious problem. Wait, this is space. There are no cameras here, no reporters, and none of those New York citizens who only know how to scream. In other words, who the hell am I showing off for out here? Gil Chang's mentality crumbled. The feeling was as miserable as wearing a full set of god-tier gear and slaughtering everyone in a starter village, only to find out you've been disconnected and no one saw it. No audience, no popularity points. Then what's the point of playing? A waste of expression. Gil Chang's original expression of enjoying the battle instantly collapsed into one of extreme impatience and disgust. Since there's no audience, don't blame me for not following the script. Finish up quickly, go home and eat. Gil Chong glanced at the nuclear bomb beneath his feet, which was still counting down. To hell with this. Like throwing away trash, he grabbed the multi-ton nuclear missile with one hand and aimed for the largest Chidori mothership in the distance. Using his waist for power, he threw it violently. Boom. Though there was no sound, space itself seemed to vibrate from this immense force. The nuclear bomb turned into a shooting star, heading straight for the mothership. However, the moment the nuclear bomb was about to hit the mothership, a layer of pale blue energy shielding suddenly lit up on the mothership's surface. Boom. A dazzling nuclear fireball erupted outside the shield, like a giant firework going off outside a glass dome. The fireball dissipated. The mothership hadn't even lost a chip of paint. Floating in the distance, the corners of Gil Chang's mouth twitched wildly. That's it. Humanity's strongest weapon is just this. It can't even break the membrane. This is too pathetic. Gil Chong felt his patience had been exhausted. Since technology isn't working, then I'll use the hard stuff. Since I can't break the defense, then let me personally open a hole for you. Gil Chang's eyes turned cold. Bang! The space beneath his feet seemed to be shattered. His figure instantly vanished. Mach 100. Extreme speed. Gil Chong turned himself into a human kinetic weapon. No bells or whistles, just pure speed plus mass. He slammed right into that thick layer of energy shielding. Crack. If sound could travel, it would surely be a crisp shattering sound. The shield that could withstand a nuclear bomb was as fragile as toilet paper under the impact of the Man of Steel. Instantly shattered. But it wasn't over. Gil Chang's momentum didn't slow. He drilled directly into the bow of the mothership and burst out from the stern. Boom, boom, boom. Chain explosions began inside the massive mothership, firelight blooming silently in the vacuum. But it still wasn't over. Gil Chang hovered above the disintegrating mothership, the red light in his eyes flaring to the limit. Die for me. ZZZZT. Two thick beams of heat vision, like God's scalpel, performed a horizontal slice across the several kilometer-long mothership. Like a hot knife through butter. The massive mothership was cut clean in half. With the destruction of the mothership, the countless Chidori flying soldiers who were still attacking frantically were like robots whose power had suddenly been pulled. They instantly lost all power, paralyzed in place like space junk. This was the weakness of the hive mind. Kill the king, and the pawns die. Boring. Gil Chang glanced at the debris filling the space. This kind of battle without an audience was like wearing silk robes and walking in the night. It was truly too dull. He turned his head and looked at the rapidly shrinking portal. If he couldn't get back, even Superman would be left floating as space junk in this godforsaken universe. He didn't want to end up like Cars. Time to bail. Gil Chang's figure flashed as he turned into a beam of light, heading straight for that small blue opening. New York, Earth. Everyone held their breath, staring intently at the closing portal. The nuclear bomb had been inside for a long time. The man in white had also been inside for a long time. Can he still come back? Captain America's palms, gripping his shield, were covered in sweat. Tony didn't speak, only stared fixedly at the portal. Just as the portal was about to close completely into a point of light. Whoosh! A figure shot out from inside like a bolt of lightning. Immediately following, all the Chidori soldiers, and those massive Leviathan beasts, crashed to the ground. That figure hovered in midair, his white coat shining brilliantly under the sunlight. He opened his arms, welcoming the cheers that filled the sky. Although he was tired as a dog up there, in front of this group of Avengers and the citizens below. He had to be elegant. Gil Chang looked at the countless faces gazing up at him from below, the corners of his mouth curling into an extremely kind smile. It seems I've successfully saved the world. No one knew what exactly had happened in the deep, pitch black, and cold reaches of space. The once arrogant Chidori fleet hadn't even had time to send out a distress signal before they were turned into cosmic dust under that terrifying heat vision. Meanwhile, back on Earth, everyone's eyes were fixed on that single figure's back. A man in snow-white clothes, arms outstretched, floating in midair like a descending god. It was he who, by his own strength alone, had forcibly stepped onto that nuclear missile, which was about to take millions of lives, using it like a surfboard to send it straight to hell. It was also he who had ended this nightmare. At the top of Stark Tower, Tony Stark flipped open his battered faceplate, his usually cynical face now filled with complex emotions. He watched the figure shining brilliantly in the sunlight, his throat bobbing. Jarvis, sir, create a top-secret file for that guy's data. The password is for my eyes only. Tony took a deep breath, his eyes glazed over slightly. And, remind me the next time I upgrade the armor to consider this kind of nonsensical flight speed. At this moment, even someone as proud as Tony Stark had to admit in his heart. This guy was a hero. Even if he seemed a bit crazy. This is the kind of warrior Asgard admires. Thor stood to the side, the battle intent in his eyes having faded, replaced by a pure appreciation for a strong individual. Even in Asgard, there are only a handful who can achieve such a feat. Natasha tightly gripped the Mind Stone scepter. Just minutes ago, it was Gil Chang who had placed it in her hands. If not for him, the portal would never have been closed. She looked at Gil Chang in the sky. While her agent's instinct for caution remained, it was overshadowed by the relief of having survived a catastrophe. Whether he's Homelander or Superman, Natasha said softly, at least today, he saved us all. Hawkeye Barton, who had just climbed the stairs panting for breath, happened to overhear this. He glanced at the familiar figure in the sky and threw his empty quiver aside with a bitter smile. Tell me about it. I feel like God himself came down for some overtime. As for Hulk, under that dazzling sunlight, the big green guy seemed to find things a bit dull. His size began to shrink rapidly, gradually turning back into the bewildered Dr. Bruce Banner, whose pants were about to fall off. He pushed up his non-existent glasses and looked overhead. Ah, did I miss something? Why is there a person flying in the sky? Is that Tony's new armor? Thrum, thrum, thrum. Just then, the roar of propellers broke the brief silence. It was news helicopters arriving on the scene. Like sharks scenting blood, this group of media people, known as the Fourth Estate in this country, would risk anything to get the first-hand big scoop. Several helicopters circled around Gil Chong. The camera lenses, like countless eyes, were locked dead on him. Gil Chong floated in the air, looking at these lenses, his heart blooming with joy. Here it comes. Finally here. This was the part he really wanted. What's the point of being a hero without the spotlight? It's like wearing fine silks in the dead of night. Gil Chong slowly turned around to face the nearest helicopter camera. He slightly adjusted his somewhat messy collar, which had been pulled open earlier in space due to his extreme speed. Then, he faced the camera and flashed a textbook-perfect smile. In that smile, there was 30% fatigue, 30% relief, and 40% love for all mankind. It was benevolent to the extreme. He even waved at the camera with extreme friendliness. His posture was like that of a big brother from next door who had just finished work. Click, click, click. The sound of shutters was clearly audible even over the noise of the helicopters. At this moment, all of America, and even viewers across the world watching the live broadcast, were struck by this smile. It was the personification of security. It was the synonym for power. Ding. Extreme admiration and fanaticism detected worldwide. Ding. Popularity points plus 50,000. Ding. Popularity points plus 80,000. Ding. Popularity points plus 120,000. The system notification tones in Gil Chang's mind weren't just ringing, they were frantically spamming his screen. Like hitting a 10-year accumulated lottery jackpot, the dings and clangs were non-stop. In just a dozen seconds, Gil Chong watched as his popularity point balance shot up like a rocket, directly breaking the 500,000 mark. 500,000. If he relied on helping old ladies across the street, he'd have to keep doing it until the next century. Sweet, Gil Chong shouted in his heart, but his face maintained that compassionate expression. He opened the system panel, looking at the golden 500,000 popularity points and the glowing upgrade icons in the system mall. There was no need to hesitate. System, add points. Max out my heat vision. Nothing makes a Homelander more excited than a pair of eyes that can stare someone to death. Ding. Consumed 500,000 popularity points. Heat vision strengthening. Strengthening complete. Current heat vision temperature, 10,000 degrees Celsius. Congratulations to the host for achieving Savior of New York. Reputation level increased to slightly renowned. As the system notification faded, an indescribable heat flow instantly surged into his eyes. Gil Chong felt as if his eyeballs had undergone some kind of divine baptism. That feeling of overflowing power made him almost unable to resist firing a shot at the sky to celebrate. 10,000 degrees. That was nearly twice the surface temperature of the sun. In the future, if he didn't like someone, he wouldn't even need to lift a finger, one look would turn them into vapor. Gil Chong took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the wild joy in his heart to maintain that perfect smile. Performance time was over. Next, it was time to meet the Avengers. After all, he was Homelander. What would he be without a reliable organization? He turned his head and looked down at the rooftop platform of Stark Tower. The group of Avengers, some standing and some sitting, were looking up at him. The corners of Gil Chang's mouth curled up slightly, and his body moved. Whoosh! He traced an elegant arc through the air. Without kicking up any wind, he landed among them as lightly as a feather. However, the moment his feet touched the ground, clatter! The atmosphere changed instantly. Natasha's hand instinctively moved toward the holster on her outer thigh. Barton didn't have his bow, but his body tensed into a combat stance. Even Thor, who was praising him just now, subconsciously gripped his hammer, his muscles bulging. Even Tony Stark, although his palm repulsors didn't light up, had his hand in a ready-to-raise position. This was the instinctive biological reaction when facing an apex predator. Even though this predator had just saved them, that divine sense of invincible pressure was simply too strong. So strong it made them feel suffocated. Gil Chong took in everyone's reactions. He wasn't angry, he even found it a bit funny. It seemed he was leaking a bit too much dominance. He put both hands in the pockets of his white coat, his posture languid and casual. Gil Chong looked around at this group of top-tier Marvel Universe heroes, his smile becoming even more radiant. "Hi, everyone," he spoke, his voice magnetic and gentle, breaking the awkward silence. "Looks like we coordinated pretty well. Nice to meet you all. I'm John Gilchang, but you can also call me Homelander." Also, Gil Chong looked at Tony and pointed at the smashed lobby. "Mr. Stark, would you mind buying me a drink? That trip just now was quite a bit of exercise, and I'm a little thirsty." Everyone. Captain America's grip on his shield tightened, his gaze complex. "A bit too much exercise. You call flying into space with a nuclear missile to blow up an entire alien fleet a bit too much exercise? Then what does that make us? Senior citizens doing radio calisthenics?" "Ha, of course I don't mind." Tony Stark was the first to break the silence. He stepped out of the Mark 7 armor. Though his face bore some abrasions, that billionaire pride was still very much intact. "Even though my bar was just smashed by that big green guy, the good wine is always hidden in the safest place. Jarvis, contact Ms. Potts and tell her I'm not dead. Also, have her, forget it, she's already here." Along with the roar of engines, a private plane bearing the Stark Industries logo landed on the edge of the shattered helipad. A pale-faced Pepper Potts rushed out. When she saw that Tony was safe and sound, she nearly burst into tears. However, she froze for a moment when she saw the man in the white lab coat standing next to Tony, whose presence was even more powerful than Tony's. "Pepper, this is Homelander." When Tony introduced him, there was a trace of respect in his tone that even he hadn't noticed. "He just saved us, and by extension, saved New York. If you don't mind, could you pour this superhero a glass of water? You know, the automated waiters here have gone on strike." As a top-tier professional manager, Pepper possessed immense psychological resilience. She immediately composed herself, poured a glass of ice water from the remains of the bar, and handed it to Gil Chong with both hands. "Thank you, Mr. Homelander." Pepper's voice trembled slightly, out of gratitude, but also out of awe. "You're welcome, beautiful lady." Gil Chong took the glass, his fingertips inadvertently brushing against the back of Pepper's hand, still maintaining his gentlemanly demeanor. Gulp. Asterisk. He tilted his head back and drained the glass in one go. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Ha." Gil Chong exhaled a satisfied sigh and casually crushed the glass into powder, letting the crystalline grains slip through his fingers. "So refreshing, that hits the spot." Tony's eye twitched as he watched Gil Chong casually crush the glass. Tony asked in a low voice within his mind. "Jarvis, did you find anything?" "Sir, facial recognition and database comparison complete." Jarvis's voice sounded in Tony's invisible earpiece. "John Gilchang, 25 years old. Entered MIT 4 years ago, a student of Dr. Connors. Additionally, according to an equity penetration analysis, he purchased a large amount of retail shares in 2008 when Stark Industries' stock price was at its lowest. He is currently one of the top 10 individual shareholders of Stark Industries." Tony raised an eyebrow, and his previously tense body relaxed completely. He even walked over directly and slapped a hand on Gil Chang's shoulder. "Wow, I didn't expect us to be acquaintances." Tony looked at Gil Chong with a playful expression. "John Gilchang, should I call you Homelander, or should I call you my sharp-eyed minority shareholder? Going all in when my company's stock was so low I was about to lose my underwear, and then selling some at the peak. That move would make the Wolf of Wall Street weep. You really are a business prodigy." Since they were shareholders, they were part of a community of interests. Capitalist logic was just that simple and crude. With this layer of relationship added, Tony's wariness toward this man with world-ending power instantly dissipated by more than half. Gil Chong smiled slightly, not at all surprised that Tony had checked his background. "You flatter me, Mr. Stark." Gil Chong straightened his collar, his gaze sincere, or so he acted. "That wasn't business acumen." It was because I believed in Stark Industries, and more importantly, I believed in you, Tony. After all, who doesn't know that Tony Stark is the smartest and most charismatic man in the world? I knew you would bounce back, just as I believed you could create armor that would stun the world. This precise bit of flattery hit Tony Stark right in his sweet spot. The corners of Tony's mouth curled upward uncontrollably. Though he tried to suppress it, his smugness couldn't be hidden. Ahem, although what you say is the truth, saying it in public like this still makes me, well, a little embarrassed. Tony waved his hand with a, "You certainly have good taste," expression. Nearby, Captain America and Natasha exchanged a look and both rolled their eyes. This narcissist. However, in the midst of this harmonious atmosphere of mutual business praise, a set of heavy footsteps broke the peace. A black trench coat, a single eye patch, and a bald head that shone dark even in the setting sun. The director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, strode over with a team of fully armed special ops soldiers. His face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. He ignored everyone else, his one eye locked firmly on Gil Chong. "Who are you?" Fury's voice was cold, carrying the scrutinizing weight of someone long accustomed to a high position. "Relax, Nick." Tony stepped in front of Gil Chong and spread his hands. "This is our friend, and also a shareholder of Stark Industries, John Gilchang. He's the one who just took the nuke up there, surely you haven't forgotten." "I know what he did." Fury didn't care for Tony's interruption, he continued to stare at Gil Chong. "But I'm more interested in knowing how an MIT PhD student, an ordinary billionaire, suddenly learned how to fly. And how he possesses the kind of heat vision that can incinerate alien organisms in an instant." Fury's hand rested on his waist. Though he didn't draw his gun, the threat was self-evident. "Mr. Gil Chong, your power has exceeded the scope of safety assessment. We need you to come with us to S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately for a comprehensive evaluation and investigation. This is for national security, and for your own sake. This was Fury for you." Had it been anyone else, they would never have dared to speak this way after seeing Gil Chang's terrifying combat power. But he was the king of spies, he was used to controlling all uncontrollable factors. The air instantly froze. Natasha and Barton's bodies tensed, their palms instinctively moving toward the weapons on their outer thighs. Though they knew it was futile, it was professional instinct. Gil Chong looked at the hard-boiled egg in front of him, the smile on his face slowly fading. In that instant, a suffocating sense of pressure emanated from him. "S.H.I.E.L.D." Gil Chong gave a soft chuckle. "I just finished cleaning up your mess, saved this city, and even saved the lives of your group. And now you want to take me in for an investigation? What?" Gil Chong took a step forward, his height advantage allowing him to look down on Nick Fury. His gaze was like that of a god looking down at a suicidal ant. "Do you think I look like some office drone who needs to report his work to you? As for me, I usually don't even bother to look at places I'm not interested in. And as for an investigation..." Gil Chong reached out and arrogantly patted the collar of Fury's black trench coat, flicking away a speck of dust. "As a superhero who just saved the world, I go wherever I want to go. I do whatever I want to do. Since when do heroes submit to investigations? Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Director?" The air suddenly fell silent. It was so quiet that even the sound of the fans spinning inside Tony's armor could be heard clearly. Nick Fury's single eye narrowed slightly. He stared fixedly at the man in front of him, who was a head taller and was currently looking down at him with an expression as if he were looking at an ant. The atmosphere was tense, one could even say it was on the verge of exploding. "Mr. Gil Chong." Fury took a deep breath, suppressing the shudder in his heart from being stared at by an apex predator, his voice remaining firm. "This is procedure. Any asset that exceeds the scope of conventional control must..." "Asset?" Gil Chong interrupted him directly, his lips curling into a playful yet dangerous smile. "Did you just say I'm an asset? Ha 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 ha." Gil Chong suddenly burst out laughing. The laughter was hearty, but it made everyone present feel their scalps tingle. While laughing, he slowly took a step toward Fury. Just one step. The S.H.I.E.L.D. agents behind Fury instantly raised their firearms. The dark muzzles of the guns were all pointed at Gil Chang's head in unison. "Wow, so this is how S.H.I.E.L.D. treats a savior." Gil Chong didn't even glance at those gun barrels. He just continued to stare at Fury, and deep within his eyes, 2 red flames began to flicker faintly. I just helped you send a bunch of alien trash back to their hometown and saved all your lives in the process. And now you're pointing guns at me. Tisk, tisk, tisk. This is truly disheartening. A layer of fine cold sweat broke out on Fury's forehead. He felt it, that terrifying sense of oppression, as if with just a single thought from the other party, he would instantly be turned to ash. But he couldn't back down. He was the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the gatekeeper of Earth's line of defense. So, he turned his gaze toward the nearby Avengers, the meaning in his eyes clear. It's your turn to step up. This is for the safety of the Earth. However, the scene was extremely awkward. Tony Stark directly snapped his faceplate back down, pretending to look at the scenery, and even whistled. Jarvis, the weather is nice tonight, perfect for a barbecue. Sir, the current air quality index indicates heavy pollution, and it contains a large amount of alien viral residue. Shut up, those are seasonings. Tony directly ignored Fury's silent plea for help. Was he kidding? Help that black braised egg deal with his own savior and company shareholder. Tony Stark might be a jerk, but he wasn't that much of a jerk. Besides, he had long been annoyed by these S.H.I.E.L.D. bureaucrats. Nick, as much as I'd love to help you, this suit's energy is down to 3%. I couldn't even start a microwave. Tony shrugged, his tone full of schadenfreude. And I think heroes don't need to fill out forms, right? Fury's face darkened even further. He then looked toward Thor. The Prince of Asgard was swinging his hammer, looking at Fury with an expression as if he were looking at an idiot. You expect a warrior capable of crossing the void with his bare body to undergo some assessment by you mortals? Thor sneered. In Asgard, only the most cowardly of cowards are locked in cages for inspection. This warrior has earned my respect. I will not swing Mjolnir against a comrade in arms. After saying that, Thor even nodded at Gil Chong, looking like he was saying, I've got your back, buddy. Fury's heart sank halfway. His last hope, Bruce Banner. As it turned out, Dr. Banner pushed up his glasses and shrank back, his face full of resistance. Don't look at me, Director. The last person who wanted to assess and study me was General Ross. Later, well, Harlem still hasn't finished being rebuilt. The feeling of being treated like a lab rat is really terrible. I'm on Homelander's side. Good grief. Everyone is a traitor. Fury felt like his one eye was going to go blind from anger. Why was this team of Avengers so hard to lead? As for Natasha and Barton, although these two were loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, they were also the most observant. Looking at Gil Chang's eyes, which were already starting to glow red, and then at the small handguns and bow and arrows in their own hands. If they were to make a move, that wouldn't be a fight, that would be throwing their lives away. So, the two of them maintained a tacit silence and even quietly took half a step back. It seems everyone doesn't quite agree with your proposal, Mr. Director. Looking at this scene, Gil Chong felt an immense sense of satisfaction. That's how it should be. A just cause attracts much support, while an unjust one finds little. I have strength, I have money, and I have popularity. What right do you have to fight me? He took a step forward, and that mountain-heavy bioelectric field was released without reservation. Crack. The floor tiles beneath Fury's feet instantly splintered into several fine cracks. The surrounding agents holding guns felt as if a giant boulder were pressing against their chests. Even breathing became difficult, and the guns in their hands were trembling violently. Listen, Fury. Gil Chang's voice was low and magnetic, yet it carried an unquestionable dominance. I don't want to go to any S.H.I.E.L.D., and I don't want to undergo any bullshit assessment. I don't even want to know what you're thinking. I only know that I'll go wherever I want to go, and I'll do whatever I want to do. You can treat me as a friend, and we'll get along very pleasantly. Gil Chong slowly lowered his head, the red light in his eyes becoming increasingly intense. It was as if two red giant stars were about to erupt. The surrounding air began to warp and fluctuate due to the high temperature. But if you want to treat me as an enemy, or an asset, then I don't mind making your so-called S.H.I.E.L.D. disappear directly from the map. Believe me, I can do it. A threat. A naked threat. And it was a threat directed at Earth's biggest spymaster in front of everyone. If someone else had said this, Fury would have already ordered everyone to open fire. But facing Gil Chong, Fury looked at those terrifying red eyes and had no doubt. As long as he dared to say a single, no, 2 beams of heat vision would boil his brains in the next second. How was this a superhero? This was clearly a nuclear bomb in human skin. An ancestor who could explode at any moment. He had to immediately start a weakness file on him. If a counter strategy wasn't established, Earth would be finished sooner or later. But before that, to survive and to avoid letting the situation reach a complete deadlock. Fury gritted his teeth, his dark face tense to the limit. Just at this critical moment of confrontation, when Fury was about to be forced to back down. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. A strange sound of sparks suddenly rang out among the crowd. Immediately following, a circle sparking with golden energy appeared out of thin air on the rooftop platform of Stark Tower. Those sparks rotated and expanded, instantly forming a golden portal large enough for a person to pass through. A chilly wind from the Himalayas, mixed with a faint scent of sandalwood, blew out from within the portal. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events. Even the red light in Gil Chang's eyes flickered slightly. Wow, this portal, this cold wind, this bald head, isn't this the Ancient One? On the other side of that golden portal, a figure wearing a yellow monk's robe, with a bald head and an ethereal temperament, slowly walked out. She held a folding fan in her hand, and her face wore a calm smile that seemed to see through all things in the world. The Sorcerer Supreme, the Ancient One. She ignored the surrounding agents armed with live ammunition and the startled looks of the Avengers. Her deep eyes, full of wisdom, looked straight at Gil Chang, who was preparing to lash out. Young man, don't be so angry. The Ancient One's voice was gentle, yet it seemed to possess a certain magic that could soothe the agitation in one's heart. If you don't mind, would you like to come to Kamar Taj for a cup of tea? I think we have some things to talk about. About your power, and your soul that does not belong to this world. As soon as these words were spoken, Gil Chang's pupils suddenly constricted. This bald woman even saw through that. The Ancient One's voice faded. Everyone's eyes darted back and forth between the bald woman in yellow robes and Gil Chang. Nick Fury's face, already dark, was now so dark it looked like ink could be squeezed out of it. He felt that the situation today had completely spiraled out of control. First, there was a defiant, ridiculously strong Homelander. And now, a bald woman playing with sparkler rings had popped up. When did Earth become so crowded? Sorcerer. Tony Stark's eyebrows shot up behind his faceplate. He looked at the sparking portal, on the other side of which were swirling snow and ancient-looking buildings. Jarvis, analyze that ring. Is it some kind of quantum teleportation technology? Or a holographic projection? Sir, it is impossible to analyze. It is some unknown form of energy, and the temperature on the other side shows -20 degrees. All right then. Tony spread his hands. Even facing such a supernatural phenomenon, he remained stubborn. While your magic tricks are impressive, shouldn't you pay some electricity fees for opening an air conditioning vent on top of my building? The Ancient One tilted her head slightly, looking at Tony with a smile that remained calm, as if looking at a naughty child. Mr. Stark, the truth of the world is often hidden beyond the boundaries of science. As for magic, the Ancient One lightly shook the folding fan in her hand and pointed at Thor, who was warily gripping his hammer nearby. Perhaps you can ask this Prince of Asgard. Everyone's gaze instantly focused on Thor. Thor felt a bit uncomfortable being stared at. He dropped his usual boisterous attitude, and a hint of solemnity appeared in his eyes. As a god who had lived for 1,000 years, his battle instincts told him something. This slender, bald woman before him contained an extremely terrifying power within her. She was even more mysterious than his father, Odin. This is indeed magic, Thor said in a deep voice, Mjolnir faintly crackling with lightning. In Asgard, this is very common. But in Midgard, I didn't expect anyone to still master such power. Hearing the God of Thunder's personal certification, Natasha and Barton exchanged a look, both seeing the helplessness in each other's eyes. Well then, today had certainly been an eye-opener. Aliens, Superman, Thor, and now even a sorcerer had appeared. What the hell was S.H.I.E.L.D. doing before? Running a kindergarten. The calmest person present was none other than Gil Chang. He looked at the Ancient One, but inside, he was overjoyed. He was just worrying about how to solve the fatal weakness of having zero magic resistance, and this was like someone bringing a pillow just as he wanted to sleep. What does Superman fear? First is kryptonite, second is magic. There is no kryptonite in this world, so the only shortcoming is magic. If he could go to Kamar Taj for further study, get some magic defense equipment, or simply learn a couple of spells, then in this Marvel universe, wouldn't he be able to go anywhere he pleased? Thinking of this, the red light in Gil Chang's eyes instantly retracted. His face once again wore that signature smile, full of love and peace. He turned around, looking at the ashen-faced Nick Fury, his tone full of mockery. It seems, Mr. Director, your intelligence work isn't all that great. Such a powerful sorcerer lives in the Himalayas, and you actually didn't know. And you want to perform an assessment on me. I think you should first assess your own professional competence. This was simply adding insult to injury. Fury's single eye twitched, but he couldn't refute it. Because what Gil Chang said was the truth. He indeed did not know of Kamar Taj's existence. For the control-obsessed king of spies, this was an utter humiliation. How about it, young man? The Ancient One ignored Fury's predicament and extended her invitation to Gil Chang again. The tea at Kamar Taj is quite good, I think you will like it. Gil Chang straightened his collar and strode over to the Ancient One. Of course, it would be an honor. As it happens, I also have some questions I'd like to ask the Sorcerer Supreme. Like how to max out my magic resistance and such. Gil Chang added silently in his heart. Seeing Gil Chang agree, the Ancient One nodded with satisfaction. She turned around and waved the folding fan in her hand. The golden portal instantly expanded a bit more. Everyone, let today's events end here. The Ancient One's voice, though soft, clearly reached everyone's ears. As for this Mr. Gil Chang, I will take him away for the time being. Nick Fury. The Ancient One's deep eyes looked at Fury, as if she could see through his soul. Do not try to find us, and do not try to use your so-called methods. Because we are everywhere, yet nowhere to be found. Having said that, the Ancient One was the first to step into the portal. Gil Chang followed closely behind. Just before crossing the portal, he stopped. He looked back at the Avengers behind him. Specifically, he glanced at Tony. He gave a meaningful smile and even waved his hand. See you later, guys. Remember to keep a close eye on Stark Industries stock for me, that's my pension. The next second, the two disappeared into the portal. ZZZZT, ZZZZT, ZZZZT. The golden sparks rapidly contracted and finally vanished completely into the air. As if they had never appeared, leaving only the group of people on the rooftop, bewildered in the cold wind of the sunset. He just left like that. Dr. Banner pulled up his pants, looking completely dazed. Well, looks like I should go too. Tony spread his hands. Although he was full of curiosity about that magic, now was clearly not the time to delve into it. Since everyone is dispersing, who's responsible for fixing my building? Nick, does this bill come out of SHIELD's budget? Nick Fury. Meanwhile, in a quiet Zen courtyard in Kamar Taj, Gil Chang only felt the scenery before his eyes change. From modern skyscrapers, he instantly arrived at this wooden courtyard filled with an ancient atmosphere. The air was filled with a faint scent of sandalwood, and the distant snow-capped mountains were partially visible through the mist. That sense of tranquility instantly calmed his heart, which had been somewhat restless due to the killing. This is Kamar Taj. Gil Chang looked around. With his supervision, he could see a group of sorcerers in training robes practicing combat in a distant plaza. They looked a bit weak. It felt like they wouldn't even withstand a single breath from him. This is a holy land of magic, and also a secret line of defense protecting Earth. The Ancient One walked to a tea table and sat down, skillfully beginning to brew tea. Her movements were fluid, carrying a unique rhythm. Please sit, guest from another world. Gil Chang wasn't polite either and sat down directly opposite the Ancient One. He knew that in front of the Ancient One, who possessed the Time Stone, playing dumb was meaningless. Since the sorcerer knows my origin. Gil Chang picked up the teacup and took a sip. A bit bitter, not as good as cola. He put down the teacup and asked bluntly. Then you bringing me here shouldn't be just to treat me to tea, right? The fragrance of tea wafted through the air as white steam rose. Sorcerer Ancient One's technique was steady. The emerald tea liquid swirled in the cup without a single drop splashing out. She was in no hurry to answer Gil Cheng's question. Instead, she gently set down the teapot, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Young man, you truly are impatient. Even if you possess power that exceeds the speed of sound, sometimes you need to stop and savor the bitterness and sweet aftertaste of the tea in this cup. Gil Chong looked at the steaming cup of tea before him but did not reach for it. He crossed his arms and leaned back against the not-so-comfortable wooden backrest of the chair. His face wore that signature, flawless smile. I can't help it, sorcerer. I've always liked being direct. As you know, I'm a busy man. Gil Chong pointed out the door, as if he could see through the layers of snowy mountains to the bustling world on the other side of the ocean. I came all this way with you. If it's just to sit here drinking tea to cultivate my character, I'm afraid I really won't be able to stay still. After all, Gil Chong leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming increasingly gentle. There are still so many people in this world waiting for me to save them. Every minute and every second, innocent citizens are calling for Homelander. Of course, more people are calling the name Superman now. To let them down would be the greatest dereliction of duty for a superhero like me. While saying this, what Gil Chong was actually thinking was, wasting a minute of my time is wasting tens of thousands of popularity points. That's heat vision, that's the Man of Steel, that's a max-level bioelectric field. This bald old lady doesn't know a thing about brand management. The Ancient One looked at Gil Cheng's compassionate facade, her folding fan gently tapping against her palm. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that saw through the clumsy lie of a naughty child. From your tone, the Ancient One took a small sip of tea, her gaze deep. You don't seem to be all that serious about saving the world. Serious? Gil Chong acted as if he had heard a hilarious joke. He spread his hands, and the arrogance and confidence etched into his bones were released without reservation at that moment. Sorcerer, you might have some misunderstanding about me. There are so many people in the world who need saving. Even if I were God, I couldn't save them all. Of course. Gil Chong shifted his tone and picked up the teacup, feeling the warmth through his fingertips. With my abilities, if I truly want to save someone, it's an effortless task. Whether it's an alien fleet or a nuclear crisis. To me, it's just a matter of blinking an extra time. As for being serious, Gil Chong drained the tea in one gulp and casually tossed the priceless antique teacup onto the table with a crisp thud. When you are powerful enough to ignore the rules. The word serious itself is a redundant burden. I don't need to be serious. I only need to. Gil Chong pointed to the sky, his smile brilliant. Do as I please. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. The Ancient One looked at the man before her, who was arrogant to the extreme. In her long life, she had seen countless geniuses, madmen, and even gods. But she had never seen anyone like Gil Chong, who had carved arrogance into every inch of his soul. Arrogance is a sin, you know. The Ancient One's voice remained calm, without a hint of anger. Perhaps. Gil Chong shrugged indifferently. He was fed up with this cryptic dialogue. I'm here to learn how to stack magic resistance, not to listen to an ethics lesson. All right, sorcerer. Gil Cheng's smile faded, and his gaze sharpened as he looked directly into the Ancient One's eyes. Stop beating around the bush with me. Let's speak plainly. Why exactly did you bring me here? And, Gil Chong lowered his voice slightly, with a hint of dangerous probing. How did you know that I don't belong to this world? This was his biggest secret. Although he knew the Ancient One possessed the Eye of Agamotto and could see through timelines. But being called out as a transmigrator to his face still made him very uncomfortable. The Ancient One simply set down her teacup calmly, her hands tucked into her sleeves, as if stating a simple fact. I can feel that your soul is out of sync with the frequency of this world. You are like a drop of water falling into a pan of oil. Although you seem to merge. In essence, you are not a soul birthed by this universe. You come from outside. In fact, you are not within any timeline I can observe. Gil Cheng's heart skipped a beat. This old lady really has some tricks up her sleeve. But he remained outwardly unfazed and even blurted out a guess. So, I'm from another multiverse. Just like it's written in the comics. The Ancient One was momentarily stunned. She clearly hadn't expected Gil Chong to throw out this concept so bluntly. You know about the multiverse. A hint of surprise finally colored the Ancient One's tone. At this point in time, even S.H.I.E.L.D. was still playing in the mud. The number of people in this world who could understand the concept of the multiverse could be counted on one hand. Gil Chong just smiled and didn't speak. Maintaining a sense of mystery was the first rule of acting cool. More importantly, she clearly didn't know he came from another, higher dimensional universe. The Ancient One gave him a deep look but didn't press further. As the Sorcerer Supreme, she had seen too many incredible things. Someone who knew about the multiverse was rare, but still within the realm of understanding. It would seem so. The Ancient One nodded, acknowledging Gil Cheng's statement. Then, her expression became serious. However, the reason I brought you here isn't because of that. Visitors from the multiverse are rare, but not unheard of. The Ancient One stood up and walked to the edge of the courtyard, looking at the mist-shrouded Himalayas in the distance. I sought you out because I can feel the powerful soul force within you, capable of shaking reality. As well as your body, which can be called a god among men. This world needs balance. The Ancient One turned around, her back to the light, her shadow stretching long in the sunset. I have seen the timelines, seen countless futures. Your appearance is a complete accident. You are like a chess piece that suddenly barged onto the board, disrupting the original layout. But, the Ancient One paused, her gaze burning as she looked at Gil Chong. This is also a new kind of balance. Originally, I already had a suitable candidate for the next Sorcerer Supreme. In the distant future, he would go through trials and eventually take up my mantle. But because of your appearance, the future has become blurred. So, I've changed my mind. Gil Chong raised an eyebrow. Why did this sound so familiar? Stealing Dr. Strange's job. How so? Gil Chong asked. The Ancient One didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked down at the cup of cold tea on the table. The tea was like a mirror, reflecting her wise yet slightly weary eyes. In the future, you will bring great disaster to Earth. The Ancient One's voice was soft, yet it exploded in Gil Cheng's ears like a clap of thunder. Gil Cheng's heart sank. Bringing disaster to Earth in the future. Could it be that he would really fall out with those guys at S.H.I.E.L.D. later on? However, the Ancient One shifted her tone and looked up, her gaze becoming incredibly firm. Compared to the true ultimate darkness that is about to sweep through the entire dimension, the trouble you bring is nothing. In short, the Earth dimension will experience many, very serious disasters in the future. Dormammu's covetousness, the erosion of the dark dimension, even an overlord from the depths of the universe. I have watched countless timelines, trying to find a way to break the deadlock. In the original timeline, the chances of winning were slim to none. But now, because of your existence, a variable has appeared in that originally dim future. The Ancient One walked up to Gil Chong and even bowed slightly, a gesture of equality or even a request. Only you possess that power. The power to break all despair with absolute violence. So, the Ancient One reached out. In her palm floated a magic book emitting an ancient aura. John Gilchang, I ask you to stay in Kamar Taj and study magic with me. Not only to supplement your weaknesses, but also so that in the future, you will have the qualification and the ability to become the next Sorcerer Supreme. Gil Chong looked at the magic book, then at the Ancient One's serious face. Only one thought was in his mind. This is a high-level play. Sorcerer Supreme. That title sounds even more exciting than Homelander, doesn't it? And most importantly, if I become the Sorcerer Supreme, who would dare use magic against me in the future? Wouldn't that mean I could truly do whatever I want in this Marvel universe? Deal. The smile on Gil Cheng's face became much more sincere at this moment. But let's get one thing straight. I'm a fast learner. And I won't shave my head. The Sorcerer Ancient One looked at the tall man before her, especially that head of blonde hair. She couldn't help but shake her head and chuckle. Kamar Taj indeed has many rules, but the one about shaving one's head. The Ancient One touched her own smooth forehead, her folding fan tapping lightly in her hand. That is only to help sorcerers better cast aside distracting thoughts and sense magic more purely. But for you, the Ancient One paused, a playful glint in her eyes. I think if I made you shave your head, you would probably turn around and leave. That's for sure. Gil Chong nodded as if it were a matter of course. Was she joking? If Homelander lost his hair, would he still be Homelander? He'd be Saitama-sensei. Would he still have fans? Would he still have popularity points? Heads can roll, blood can flow, but the hairstyle must stay. Since the sorcerer is so reasonable, let's not waste time. Gil Chong rubbed his hands together impatiently, his eyes burning with excitement. Let's get started. I can't wait to feel what this so-called magic actually tastes like. Actually, he was mainly impatient to max out his magic resistance. As long as his magic resistance was maxed out, he, John Gilchang, would be truly invincible in this Marvel universe. When that time came, he could do whatever he wanted. Young people are always so impatient. The Ancient One smiled slightly, not at all annoyed. She slowly stood up, her yellow robe swaying gently with her movements. Come, stand here. The Ancient One pointed to an open space next to the tea table. Gil Chong didn't hesitate, taking a few steps over and standing there casually. He looked like an iron tower. Are you ready? The Ancient One asked. Of course. Gil Chong was full of confidence. Are you sure? Very sure. Gil Chong was a bit speechless. Why was this old lady being so dawdling? I'm already Superman, okay. I have a Man of Steel, okay. Could learning magic be more uncomfortable than taking a bath in the sun? However, the moment the words left his mouth, the Ancient One moved. Without any warning, and without any magical fluctuations. She simply raised her hand lightly, seemingly slow but actually as fast as lightning, and struck out with her palm. The target, Gil Chang's chest. In Gil Chang's supervision, this palm strike was as slow as a snail crawling. His instinct was to block or simply dodge. After all, no one can just hit Superman's chest. But then he thought better of it. This old lady probably wouldn't harm him. Moreover, he wanted to see what kind of tricks this so-called Sorcerer Supreme actually had. And so, he didn't move, taking the palm strike head-on. He didn't even activate his bioelectric field. Thud. A muffled sound. There was no pain like he imagined, nor that feeling of a heavy impact. Gil Chong only felt his entire body lighten. Immediately after. Holy crap! An exclamation escaped his lips. Gil Chong discovered with horror that his perspective had changed. His entire being flew backward uncontrollably, light as a feather, without any weight. While him, that should have been standing there, was currently standing straight with eyes tightly shut, hands still in his pockets. This is. Gil Chong looked down at his hands. They were translucent. They were even emitting a faint golden light. He tried to clench his fists. There was no physical sensation of touch, only a surge of pure energy. Astral projection. Gil Chong realized it instantly. This was the move the Ancient One used in the movie to teach Doctor Strange a lesson. Except, this feeling was so wonderful. Gil Chong did a somersault in the air, feeling like he had turned into a cloud, or perhaps a gust of wind. Completely freed from the shackles of the physical body, his thoughts became clearer than ever before. Even the tiny dust particles in the air around him became colorful in his eyes. She actually managed to knock my soul out. Gil Chong floated back to his physical body, stroking his chin though he couldn't feel it, his face full of novelty. So this is what astral projection feels like. It's actually pretty cool. If it were an ordinary person, they would be screaming in terror by now. The Ancient One withdrew her hand, looking at Gil Chong floating in the air, a hint of admiration flashing in her eyes. Not only are you not afraid, but you also figured out the situation immediately. Your soul strength is much more powerful than I imagined. That's a given. Gil Chong floated proudly in the air, striking a Superman flying pose. After all, I am Homelander. Not only is my body strong, my soul has to be top-notch too. In that case, the smile at the corners of the Ancient One's mouth deepened. She looked at this man who remained full of confidence and arrogance even in soul form. Then I will show you what this world truly looks like. What? Gil Chong was momentarily stunned. Before he could react, the Ancient One struck again. She reached out her finger and tapped lightly on Gil Chang's translucent forehead. Open your eye. Boom. Gil Chong felt his vision go black, followed by the world spinning. Ah, he felt like he had been thrown into a giant kaleidoscope-themed washing machine. His entire being was instantly catapulted out. 1 second, he was in the meditation room at Kamar Taj. The next second, he was in the midst of a brilliantly bizarre and kaleidoscopic scene. Countless colors and geometric shapes spun, exploded, and reassembled wildly around him. He saw universes splitting like cells. He saw worlds growing out of countless palms. He saw time flowing backward and space folding. Holy hell, this is more intense than being on drugs. Gil Chong shuttled through the gaps between dimensions, the visual impact nearly shattering his soul. This was far more shocking than watching IMAX in a theater. Is this the multiverse? Suddenly, the scene shifted. A space that was pitch black, silent, and filled with an aura of despair and terror appeared before his eyes. Deep within that endless darkness, two massive planets, burning with purple magical fire, slowly opened like eyes. Dormammu, the ruler of the dark dimension. Even with just a fleeting glance, Gil Chong felt that suffocating sense of evil and power. If it were the old him, he might have felt fear. But now, Tisk, what a big face. You're really ugly. Gil Chong gave him a middle finger in his mind. Once I learn magic, I'll treat your dark dimension like my back garden. Whoosh. Before he could take another look, a massive suction force pulled him back. Gil Chong felt like he was being yanked back by a giant rubber band. Past countless stars, past countless dimensions. Thump. A muffled sound. Gil Chong snapped his eyes open, gasping for air. The heavy sensation of his soul returning to his body hit him instantly. He looked down. His hands were solid again, and his feet were on the ground. He was back. How do you feel? The Ancient One still stood in the same spot. Her pose hadn't even changed, wearing that unfathomable smile. Gil Chong shook his somewhat dizzy head. I feel. He stood up straight, the shock in his eyes gradually fading, replaced by an even more fanatical light. That was so exciting. So this is the multiverse. This is the world of magic. The Ancient One nodded, not at all offended by his crude language. And what did you see? The Ancient One asked. I saw a lot. Gil Chong took a deep breath, recalling that brief experience. Suddenly, as if remembering something, he raised his hand and made a grasping motion in the air. Supervision activated unconsciously, but this time, it seemed a bit different. Besides all those flashy things, Gil Chong squinted, looking at the seemingly ordinary air around him, a hint of confusion in his voice. I seem to see Earth covered in blood vessels. Glowing things, like meridians, densely covering the entire surface of the Earth. And, Gil Chong pointed beneath his feet. This place seems to be a giant node. As soon as he said this, the Ancient One, who had maintained a calm smile, finally changed her expression. A flash of genuine surprise appeared in her eyes. You saw the magical ley lines. On your first astral projection, you actually saw the Vishanti's magical defense network in the ley line nodes. The Ancient One looked at Gil Chong as if she were looking at a piece of peerless unpolished jade. This kind of talent was simply unheard of. Even for her back then, it had taken years of meditation to barely perceive the existence of these things. And this man had seen them with just one glance. Indeed. The Ancient One took a deep breath, the smile on her face becoming even more satisfied. I was right to choose you. Your talent even surpasses that of the previous Sorcerer Supreme. John Gilchang. The Ancient One turned around and strode out of the courtyard, waving her folding fan. Follow me. Even though you are exceptionally gifted, we must still start from the basics. Now, I will teach you the most basic magic, the Ragador's rings. Which is what you commonly call a magical shield. Gil Chang's eyes lit up. Magical shield, isn't that the golden light circle? Cool. Without a word, he followed her directly. Coming. Sorcerer, can this thing block a nuclear bomb? If I add a magical enchantment to my heat vision, can it shoot straight through dimensions? Hearing the series of wild questions coming from behind her, the Ancient One stumbled slightly, almost losing her cool sorcerer image. Enchanting heat vision. This young man's ideas were really a bit dangerous. Sorcerer Ancient One lightly tapped the folding fan in her hand. She led Gil Chong through the quiet cloisters and arrived at a spacious martial arts arena. There were already quite a few sorcerers dressed as ascetics practicing here. The air was thick with the mixed scent of sweat and incense. Gil Chong had his hands in his pockets, watching the group of magic apprentices with great interest. In the center of the arena, two sorcerers were sparring. One of them pulled his hands apart, and a golden magical whip appeared out of thin air. With a crackling sound of sparks, it lashed out fiercely toward the opponent. The other person was not to be outdone, drawing a circle with both hands in front of his chest. ZZZZT. Complex geometric patterns instantly lit up, and a shield of the seraphim covered in runes manifested out of thin air. Snap! The whip struck the shield, splashing a series of brilliant sparks. Cool. Gil Chong couldn't help but whistle. To be honest, this was much more exciting than movie special effects. Watching magic particles dancing in the air from such a close distance was simply too cool. And most importantly, this stuff is stylish. As a superhero, whether you're strong or not is temporary, but whether you're stylish or not is a lifelong matter. Imagine this. In the future, he'd be choking Thanos with his left hand while conjuring a golden magical greatsword with his right. That imagery, that level of prestige, wouldn't his popularity points skyrocket? Is that what you're going to teach me? Gil Chong pointed at the sorcerer conjuring the shield, looking eager to try. Exactly. The Ancient One nodded slightly and led Gil Chong to an empty spot. The surrounding sorcerers who were practicing all stopped their movements. They curiously sized up this stranger wearing a white lab coat and standing impossibly tall. Magic as the visualization of one's own spiritual power into real-world energy. The Ancient One said while slowly raising her hand. Her movements were very slow, like she was practicing Tai Chi. Concentrate your spirit, feel the stray energy in the universe, and then with a flip of her wrist. An exquisite, complex magical shield emitting a divine golden light instantly formed in her palm. Construct it. The Ancient One dispelled the magic and looked at Gil Chong. You try. That's it. Drawing circles. I'm good at that. Gil Chong reached out his hand with full confidence, relying on the terrifying computing power and memory of his super brain. The complex hand seals the Ancient One had just performed were broken down into the most basic action frames in his eyes. Without any hesitation, Gil Chong took a deep breath, and his mental power concentrated instantly. He flicked his wrist sharply. ZZZZT. Unlike Doctor Strange, who struggled for ages only to produce a few sparks. In an instant, a golden magical shield, even a size larger and more dazzling than the one the Ancient One had just demonstrated, appeared directly in front of Gil Chang's arm. The complex patterns were clearly visible, and it was even slowly rotating. Holy crap, it worked! Gil Chong himself was stunned for a moment. He shook his arm, and the magical shield steadily followed his movements without any sign of dissipating. This is magic. Doesn't seem that hard, does it? The sound of collective gasps instantly echoed around them. Hiss. Success on the first try. My God, I practiced for 3 whole months back then just to draw a complete circle. Who is this guy? Is he the illegitimate son of some great dimensional archmage? Those sorcerers who had practiced for years looked at the flawless magical shield in Gil Chang's hand, their eyes nearly popping out of their heads. This was too discouraging. Even the always calm Ancient One had a flash of amazement in her eyes. Although she knew Gil Chong was exceptionally gifted, this speed of mastery, it was as if this magic had been created by him in the first place. It seems your talent is indeed enviable. The Ancient One nodded, her tone carrying a hint of approval. Keep it down, keep it down. Gil Chong dispelled the magical shield. Although a humble smile was on his face, his smugness was practically overflowing. It's mainly because a famous teacher produces a high-level apprentice. You taught well, sorcerer. The Ancient One shook her head helplessly. In the time that followed, the martial arts arena completely became Gil Chang's personal show. Magical whip. One look, and he got it. Magical blade. A couple of gestures, and it was done. His terrifying talent for learning instantly and mastering immediately. It made the surrounding sorcerers go from shock to numbness, and finally, they even felt like crying. Comparing yourself to others really is infuriating. However, Gil Chong was clearly not satisfied with these cold weapons. He wanted the coolest one. That sparking, anywhere door, that lets you go wherever you want. Sorcerer, where's that sling ring? Gil Chong rubbed his hands together, looking at the Ancient One expectantly. The Ancient One didn't waste words and casually tossed him a sling ring. Gil Chong caught it and slipped it onto his finger, recalling Doctor Strange's movements from the movie in his mind. Think of the place you want to go in your heart. Draw a circle. Gil Chong closed his eyes, and the place he had been longing for surfaced in his mind. That penthouse apartment that cost him $100 million and was scrapped before he even had a chance to enjoy it. He raised his right hand and drew a circle in the air. ZZZZT. Golden sparks began to fly. A huge sparking teleportation portal, over 2 meters in diameter, opened out of thin air. Through that ring of sparks, the scene on the other side was clearly visible. It was Manhattan at dusk. And a mess of ruins. The original luxurious floor-to-ceiling windows were gone, and the expensive leather sofa had turned into a pile of torn stuffing. That sky pool he loved most was currently so bone-dry it didn't have a drop of water, and half of a Chidori Flyer's wreckage was stuck inside it. Seeing this scene, Gil Chang's originally excited face instantly darkened. A surge of nameless anger rushed to his head. Those Chidori scum. My $100 million. That was a whole $100 million. Do you have any idea how much the renovations are going to cost? It was precisely this agitation of emotion. The originally stable portal suddenly began to tremble violently. ZZZZT. Pop. The golden sparks instantly extinguished, and the portal vanished into thin air. What the hell? Gil Chong was stunned, maintaining his circle-drawing posture with a look of utter confusion. Why is it gone? Impatience and irritability. The Ancient One's voice sounded at the right time. She was waving her folding fan with an, "I knew this would happen," expression. Magic requires focus, and even more so, it requires peace. Your talent is indeed unparalleled, John. The Ancient One walked up to him and said earnestly. But your heart is filled with too much desire and anger. If you cannot control your emotions, your magic will be like it was just now, liable to collapse at any moment. Gil Chong curled his lip. Got it, got it. I'll pay attention next time. At that moment, a young sorcerer nearby, who was working hard to draw a circle but couldn't even produce a single spark, looked at Gil Chong with a pained expression. Then he looked at the Ancient One. Sorcerer Supreme, the young sorcerer asked pitifully, why could he open a portal on his first try? Didn't you say not to seek quick success? This is just too discouraging, isn't it? The Ancient One glanced at the apprentice, sighed helplessly, and shook her head. If you had his talent for molding the rules of space like Plato, then you wouldn't have to worry about seeking quick success either. Saying that, the Ancient One looked back at Gil Chong, but before she could speak, Gil Chong had already leaned in front of the apprentice with a helpful face, revealing Homelander's signature, kind smile. Hey, buddy, don't lose heart. If you really can't learn it, I can teach you. As long as you call me teacher, I guarantee. Cough, cough, asterisk. The Ancient One coughed heavily twice, interrupting Gil Chang's eagerness to teach. If she let him teach, she feared the style of Kamartage would be led astray into a ditch. All right, John. The Ancient One folded her fan, her expression returning to seriousness. Since you have already mastered the basic magic, then today's lesson will end here. For the rest, go back and practice more on your own. Remember, come back here on this day every week. Next time, I will teach you more advanced magic. As soon as he heard advanced magic, Gil Chang's eyes instantly lit up. Don't wait until next time, sorcerer. Gil Chong got anxious and said quickly. There's no time like the present. Look at me, I'm in such good state right now, my energy is so vigorous. How about we learn it right now? I learn things very fast, really. Teach me a couple more moves. The Ancient One looked at this insatiable fellow, a meaningful smile curling at the corner of her mouth. Young man, you must know when to stop. The Ancient One said softly. For some things, it's not yet the time. Since you want to go back and see your house so badly, then go back. Before her voice had even faded, the Ancient One's finger pointed downward extremely casually. ZZZZT. A huge golden portal instantly opened under Gil Chang's feet without any warning. Gil Chong only felt the ground vanish beneath him. That sensation of weightlessness hit him instantly. Holy crap, you bald head, you're playing dirty. You have no magical ethics. Accompanied by a scream, Gil Chong fell straight in. The next second, thud. He fell heavily into a pile of building debris, kicking up a floor's worth of dust. Gil Chong scrambled out of the ruins in a sorry state, spitting out the plaster dust in his mouth. He looked up, surrounded by shattered glass walls, with Manhattan at dusk overhead. It was exactly that penthouse apartment of his that cost $100 million but had now turned into a Syrian-style ruin. That bald head. He looked around. The once priceless Persian carpet was now just a tattered rag. His favorite imported Italian leather sofa was now hanging miserably from a steel bar, looking like a dried salted fish. Phew. Gil Chong took a deep breath, trying his best to suppress the urge to slice the earth in half with his heat vision. Calm down. Be elegant. After all, he was now an American Idol, the Homelander. Fortunately, I had the foresight to buy the most expensive commercial insurance. A cold sneer curled the corner of Gil Chang's mouth as he pulled out his phone. He skillfully dialed the insurance company's VIP line. Beep, beep. Hello, distinguished Mr. John Gilchang, this is All American Mutual Insurance. I am happy to be of service. A sweet customer service voice came from the other end of the line. Happy. I'm not happy. Gil Chong kicked away a concrete slab blocking his path, his voice cold. My house, that Manhattan penthouse, was blown up by those alien scumbags. Start the claims process for me right now. My demands aren't high. Compensation at the market price plus emotional distress damages. Let's round it up to $200 million. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, followed by the sound of typing. I am very sorry, Mr. Gil Chong. The customer service representative's voice began to tremble, seemingly reading from a script of some clause. According to the notice we just received from headquarters, since the New York incident has been characterized as an act of war caused by an alien invasion. According to Article 73, Clause 4 of the insurance policy, this falls under force majeure. Therefore, I'm sorry, but we cannot fulfill the claim. Gil Chang's grip on the phone tightened slightly. He laughed out of pure anger. Force majeure. When that salesman knelt before me begging me to buy insurance, he beat his chest and told me that even if aliens came and tore down my house, you guys would pay. And now you're telling me, force majeure. The aliens actually showed up, didn't they? And that counts as force majeure. Sir, I am truly sorry, but these are company regulations. Regulations. In Gil Chang's eyes, a red light began to flicker dangerously. Crack. The phone finally gave out, turning into a pile of electronic scrap in Gil Chang's hand. A bunch of vampires, capitalists. Gil Chong cursed as he threw the phone's remains into the rubble. These people are even more hateful than the Chittori. The Chittori want your life, but these insurance companies want your money. How can I stand this? Gil Chong took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. The house was gone, but life had to go on. He walked over to what used to be the walk-in closet, now just a half-standing wall. He rummaged through the dust for a while. Good luck. Gil Chong pulled out a black suit wrapped in a garment bag. This was a handmade, expensive suit he had custom-ordered for the Stark Industries shareholders meeting. He hadn't expected it to survive in the rubble. Rustle. Gil Chong changed into the sharp black suit right there in the ruins. Standing by the balcony, which was now just a steel skeleton, he straightened his tie. The afterglow of the setting sun spilled over him, casting a long shadow. In the distance stood the equally battered Stark Tower. The iconic, Stark, sign was missing an A, but it still stood tenaciously. Since those unscrupulous merchants won't listen to reason, I'll find someone who knows the law to reason with them. Gil Chong looked at Stark Tower, a smile playing on his lips. Tony Stark. This wealthy tycoon not only had money but also the top legal team in the US. In a time like this, who else would I look for? Just as well, I left in a hurry earlier and didn't have time to catch up properly with my good friend. Vroom. The bioelectric field vibrated slightly. Gil Chang's figure vanished instantly, leaving behind only a visible ripple in the air. Stark Tower, penthouse luxury apartment. Although it had taken a heavy hit, it was Tony's home base after all. The defense system had been somewhat effective, there was at least a living room where one could sit. Tony Stark was slumped on the sofa, holding a glass of whiskey with ice, staring somewhat blankly at a holographic projection screen. On the screen was a replay of Gil Chong tearing apart warships in space and tanking a nuclear bomb with his bare body. Jarvis, Play it again in 0.5x slow motion. Tony took a swig of his drink, his voice a bit raspy. Sir, this is the 37th time you have watched it. Jarvis's magnetic British accent contained a rare hint of concern. According to data model analysis, Mr. Gil Cheng's physical strength has exceeded the hardness limit of any known element on Earth. His flight speed broke Mach 150 at the final moment, and the resulting kinetic energy. Jarvis, speak in plain terms. Tony rubbed his brow. Simply put, sir, if he wanted to, he could tear the Mark V and you inside it to shreds like a wet paper towel. Tony's hand trembled, spilling a bit of his drink. Though he wouldn't admit it, a deep sense of helplessness and anxiety had begun to gnaw at his heart like a venomous snake. Is this the power of Superman? Compared to a monster like this, his proud tin can was practically a child's toy. Sir, a high-energy signature is approaching. It's extremely fast. Unable to lock on. Jarvis's voice suddenly became urgent. Before Tony could react. Boom! A violent sonic boom echoed from the direction of the balcony. The bulletproof glass door that had just been repaired rattled from the terrifying wind pressure before it could even be opened. A dark silhouette appeared out of thin air on the balcony, as if teleporting. A gust of wind rushed into the living room, messing up Tony's meticulously styled hair and blowing a pile of blueprints off the table. Holy crap! Tony was so startled he nearly jumped off the sofa, throwing his glass away. Jarvis, where's my suit? Calm down, Tony. A familiar voice spoke. Gil Chong walked in from the balcony with an elegant stride. He was wearing that sharp black suit and even reached out to catch the glass Tony had thrown. The ice inside hadn't even melted yet. Such good liquor, what a waste it would be. Gil Chong gently placed the glass on the table, a signature kindly smile on his face. Tony's eyes widened as he looked at the man before him, unscathed and even in a new outfit. Not long ago, this guy had been taken away by that bald magician. And he's back already. Where did you pop out from? Tony feigned composure and straightened his collar, trying to regain his billionaire swagger. Besides, if I recall correctly, my security system hasn't authorized you yet, has it? Security system. Gil Chong sat casually on the opposite sofa, crossing his legs. For a hero who just saved the world, things like doors are just decorations. Besides, I flew here. Flew? Tony arched an eyebrow. From the Himalayas. Pretty much. Gil Chong shrugged, not bothering to explain much about the magic. I just did a bit of further study over there and had a cup of tea while I was at it. The taste was okay, just a bit weak. Tony, further study. Tea, did you go on a tour of another dimension or something? Seeing Gil Cheng's relaxed and comfortable manner, the anxiety in Tony's heart actually lessened slightly. At least this guy seemed communicable now. And he was a guy who cared about his outfit. Fine, Superboy. Tony poured another drink, his tone returning to its usual snark. That outfit is nice. You look like a mafia godfather preparing for a funeral. So, why were you in such a hurry to get back? Did that bald magician kick you out because you were eating too much? Gil Chong didn't mind Tony's teasing. He leaned forward slightly, his smile fading as he became a bit more serious. No, Tony, I came to see you because I've encountered a very serious, very troublesome problem. Seeing Gil Cheng's serious expression, Tony's heart skipped a beat. Are more aliens coming? Or did that bald magician predict some kind of apocalypse? What is it? Tony set down his glass, his expression solemn. Did Loki escape again? It's more serious than that. Gil Chong took a deep breath and said word by word. My house was blown up. And then, that insurance company actually refused to pay. Tony. The air suddenly went silent for 3 seconds. That's it. Tony looked at him as if he were an idiot. What do you mean, that's it? Gil Chong slammed his hand on the table and stood up, full of indignation. I spent 100 million on that. 100 million. That's my hard-earned money. Those vampires actually told me something about force majeure. Did I save the world just so they could save on-claim payouts? Looking at the man before him who possessed the power of Superman, now fuming over a house payment like a petty commoner. Tony froze for a moment, then couldn't help but burst out laughing. PFF'd. Ha 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 ha. Are you serious? Of course I'm serious. Gil Chong straightened his suit with a look of dead seriousness. So, Tony, as my friend and a major shareholder of Stark Industries, you must have one of those incredibly powerful legal teams that can turn black into white and argue the dead back to life, right? Let me use them. I'm going to sue that son of a fool insurance company. I'm going to make them pay until they don't even have their underwear left. Tony looked at Gil Chong, and the fear in his eyes completely dissipated. It was replaced by a sense of kinship, a feeling of, so you're just a regular person after all. As long as there are desires, as long as one is greedy for money, things are easy to handle. The most terrifying thing is a god with no desires or needs. All right, my major shareholder. Tony snapped his fingers, a confident smile characteristic of a capitalist appearing on his face. Although this sounds like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But since you've asked, Jarvis, call my chief legal team. Tell them that if they don't sue that insurance company into bankruptcy, all of next year's bonuses are cancelled. Also, Tony looked at Gil Chong and raised his glass. Welcome back, Homelander. Welcome back, Homelander. Tony raised his glass, a searching light flickering in those big caramel eyes. But seriously, that name sounds, well, how should I put it, a bit retro. Or are you planning to run for president? Tony leaned back on the sofa, his posture relaxed. Gil Chong swirled the red wine in his hand. What, not calling me Superman anymore? Give me a break. Tony rolled his eyes and pointed at Gil Chong. You've corrected us several times already. If I kept calling you Superman, wouldn't that make me look pretty tactless? But speaking of which, Tony leaned in a bit closer, his face full of curiosity. Why Homelander? Homelander, it sounds like the protagonist of some extremely insecure patriotic propaganda film. Gil Chong smiled slightly. Here it comes. The classic persona building phase. He set down his glass. Though he was sitting, a divine aura of compassion instantly emanated from him. At this moment, he wasn't the mundane person suing an insurance company for $100 million in housing payments, but the symbol of America. Tony, you don't understand. Gil Chang's voice was deep and magnetic. This country, this world, is on the brink of falling apart. People need a symbol, something more than just a superhero who flies around saving cats. Gil Chong stood up and walked to the shattered floor-to-ceiling window, his back to Tony. At that moment, his silhouette appeared incredibly tall. They need an existence as warm as home and as strong as a father, someone who can represent the purest will of this land. Home, homeland, motherland. I don't fly for myself, I fly for every soul on this land yearning for security. That is the Homelander. Having said that, Gil Chong slowly turned around, his face wearing that impeccable smile full of divinity and paternal love. Simply perfect. This set of classic rhetoric from the boys, placed in this simple Marvel universe, was practically a dimensional strike. Tony was stunned as he listened. He held his glass, forgetting to take a sip for a long time. Good grief. This level of awareness. Tony felt that if he recorded these words and sent them to Steve Rogers, that centenarian would probably be so ashamed he'd eat his shield. This was more Captain America than Captain America. Whoa. Tony blinked and set his glass down. To be honest, although it sounds like a show, I have to admit, it's very stirring. I like your kind of, well, extreme patriot. Tony stood up, seemingly having made a decision. Since your awareness is so high, I won't beat around the bush. Interested in joining us, the Avengers? Gil Chong raised an eyebrow. Yeah, that Superboy group, the one-eyed guy put together. Tony spread his hands. The name's a bit tacky, and the members are all freaks, like a certain grumpy alien with a hammer and a certain fossil in tights. But we need a patriot like you. Tony looked at Gil Chong with a rare look of seriousness in his eyes. Besides, the top floor of Stark Tower has empty rooms. It's a bit drafty now, but the view will be great once it's fixed. Gil Chong was overjoyed inside. Isn't this exactly what he wanted? With the Avengers as an officially endorsed platform, wouldn't gaining popularity points be like adding wings to a tiger? And by joining the Avengers, if S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted to try any funny business in the future, they'd have to think twice. Most importantly, this was a long-term meal ticket. Of course, the smile on Gil Chang's face grew even brighter. Fighting evil and protecting peace has always been my dream. It would be an honor to join the Avengers. Ha, excellent. Tony snapped his fingers. I'll throw a party tonight so everyone can meet. It's also a good time to celebrate the joy of not being dead. Gil Chong nodded nonchalantly. Parties were a staple for the wealthy, he naturally wouldn't refuse. But Tony, Gil Chong pointed to the expensive but now somewhat dusty suit he was wearing. Since I'm making my official debut as a superhero, I can't keep wearing this, can I? I don't want the media calling me Suit Man or White Collar Superman. Of course not. Tony slapped his forehead. Look at my memory. How can a superhero not have a uniform? That's the key to brand image. Jarvis, sir, I am here. Start a new project, code name, Homelander. We need a top-tier battle suit. Tony waved his hand, and a holographic projection instantly unfolded in the center of the living room. Tell me, how do you want it designed? Bulletproof, blast-proof, or maybe add some thrusters? Tony asked enthusiastically. No need for those flashy features. Gil Chong waved his hand. My body is the best defense. I just need it to look cool. It must have a cape. That's the soul. Gil Chong walked to the holographic projection and began to gesture. In his mind, that classic Homelander suit was already well etched. That was the guarantee for popularity. The primary color should be blue, a deep kind. The epaulets should be gold, with that sense of military authority. I don't need An's on the chest, that's too old-fashioned. Give me an A. A golden A. It stands for Avengers, and it also stands for America and the Americas. Most importantly, Gil Chong turned around and pointed to his back, his eyes fanatical. The cape. The cape should be the pattern of the stars and stripes. The American flag. I want to drape the entire country over myself. Even Tony Stark was stunned by this design concept. Draping the national flag over one's body. This was too arrogant. But on second thought, wasn't this the best interpretation of the name, Homelander? Jarvis, do as he says. A hint of admiration appeared in Tony's eyes. This kind of arrogant aesthetic was right up his alley. Soon, in the holographic projection, a blue skin-tight battle suit slowly took shape. Golden epaulets, a large golden A on the chest, and the stars and stripes cape fluttering in the wind behind him. That sense of oppression, representing absolute power and authority. And most importantly, that feeling of representing America, came rushing at them. Perfect. Gil Chong snapped his fingers, looking at the suit as if he were looking at the countless popularity points he was about to receive. A Homelander without this skin would have no soul. Only by wearing it and looking down upon all living things from a height would he be the true, complete form. Good taste, really good taste. Tony stroked his chin in appraisal. It'll be ready by tomorrow morning. It uses the top-tier materials from Stark Industries, the breathability is definitely better than that suit of yours. Just then, the sound of high heels clicking on the floor was heard. Pepper Potts came walking over quickly, holding a tablet. Although they had just been through a major battle, this powerful woman had clearly entered work mode already. Tony, Mr. Gil Chong. Pepper nodded to Gil Chong, a hint of awe in her eyes. The legal team you requested has arrived, they're in the conference room downstairs. The top insurance claim lawyers in all of New York are there. They say that as long as there's an insurance contract, even if God tore the house down, they could make heaven pay until it's bankrupt. Hearing this, Tony turned to look at Gil Chong, a cynical smile appearing on his face. He made a please gesture. Come on, Homelander. The assembly of lawyers you wanted is complete. Gil Chong straightened his collar, a menacingly kind smile curling at the corners of his mouth. Thanks, Tony. I think that insurance company probably won't be getting any sleep tonight. Shortly after, it had to be said, this was the power of money. A group of elite lawyers in suits with generally high hairlines sat around the conference table. Mr. Gil Chong, are you saying that the salesperson made a verbal promise during the pitch that alien invasions are also covered? The lead barrister pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses. Of course. Gil Chong leaned back in his chair, playing with a pen in his hand, smiling with a kind of nuclear benevolence. My memory has always been excellent. I even remember exactly which corner of that contract he circled at the time. Then this will be easy to handle. The barrister closed the folder, his tone as confident as if he had already ground the opposition into the dirt. Even if it's a verbal promise, as long as there's a chain of indirect evidence, combined with pressure from the Stark Industries legal department, rest assured, Mr. Gil Chong. After tonight, that insurance company's stock price will be in a very embarrassing state, and their CEO will likely need sleeping pills to drift off. That couldn't be better. Gil Chong nodded with satisfaction, stood up, and straightened his suit. I love watching capitalists engage in dog-eat-dog fights, especially when the side doing the biting is my dog. After seeing off the group of elite vampires, Gil Chong followed Tony into a private elevator directly to the underground garage. Although he had long known Tony was a filthy rich tycoon. The moment the elevator doors opened, Gil Chong couldn't help but shout, "Holy shit," in his heart. In his line of sight, from the classic Shelby Cobra to the latest Bugatti Veyron. To those limited edition supercars that only existed in concept sketches, they were neatly parked across thousands of square meters of space. The lights hit the smooth car paint, reflecting nothing but the scent of money. Pick any one you like. Consider it an onboarding gift for a new comrade in arms. Tony casually tossed a bunch of keys onto a nearby table. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Gil Chong marveled as he walked through the collection. In his previous life, he hadn't even accumulated this many cars in Los Santos. Even after transmigrating and making a fortune by buying stocks at rock-bottom prices. He had only bought houses and decorated them, he hadn't really put much heart into consumables like cars. Now, looking at these industrial works of art, Gil Chong admitted his man heart was stirred. Since he was Homelander, he had to drive the flashiest car. Gil Chang's gaze swept across the luxury cars, finally locking onto a supercar with an extremely exaggerated design and a body of solid gold color. Gumpert Apollo, the sun god. This name, this color, it was practically tailor-made for a man like him who relied on the sun to grow stronger. This is the one. Gil Chong walked over and patted the golden hood. The name sounds auspicious, and it's flashy enough. Good eye. This car goes 0 to 60 in just 3 seconds. Although it's slow as a turtle compared to you, it's among the fastest things running on the ground. Tony commented, then walked toward his own signature Audi R8. However, just as Tony pulled the car door open and prepared to sit inside, his movements suddenly froze. Cough, cough, cough. Tony suddenly clutched his chest, his face turning pale as paper in an instant, fine beads of cold sweat seeping from his forehead. A burning, intense pain spread from the reactor in his chest, crawling through his blood vessels to his entire body. With movements both practiced and frantic, he pulled a small device out of his pocket that looked like a glucose monitor and pressed his finger onto it. Beep beep. Asterisk. The device emitted a piercing alarm sound. Blood toxicity. 24%. Tony looked at the number, his eyes dimming for a split second before he quickly resumed his cynical disguise. He took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the metallic taste in his throat, and turned to wave at Gil Chong, who was about to get into his car. Hey, big guy, you go on up first. Tony's voice sounded a bit weak, but he struggled to keep his tone upbeat. I just remembered I have some, private business to handle. You know, geniuses are always busy. Gil Chang's hand, which had been pulling the car door, stopped in midair. He turned his head and looked at the struggling Tony, his eyes, possessing supervision, narrowing slightly. Actually, he didn't need supervision at all. As a transmigrator who had seen the entire Marvel collection, he knew exactly what Tony's current situation was. Palladium poisoning. The arc reactor that was keeping him alive was slowly killing him. It seemed that although the Battle of New York was over, Tony hadn't had time to solve this problem yet. The battle just now had even deepened the poisoning. According to the original plot, Tony should have solved this problem long ago. But looking at it now, his transmigration must have caused a shift in the timeline. This is a great opportunity to farm some favorability. Gil Chong thought deviously to himself. Saving Tony Stark would not only secure his long-term meal ticket and dividends, but it would also make this proud genius owe him a favor so large it could never be repaid. This deal was a massive profit. Thud. Asterisk. Gil Chong closed the door of the Apollo and did not leave. Instead, taking long strides, he walked behind Tony in a few steps. At this moment, Tony was leaning against the Audi, his hand trembling as he prepared to take chlorophyll juice from the storage compartment. Suddenly, a broad and powerful palm patted his shoulder. Hey, I told you I'm busy right now. Tony instinctively turned back, his face full of impatience, wanting to drive away this meddling fellow. However, Gil Chong didn't give him the chance to finish his sentence. He lowered his head, staring directly at the reactor on Tony's chest that emitted a faint blue glow. There was no joking expression on his face, and his tone was terrifyingly serious. Tony, your situation is very serious. Tony froze for a moment, then his eyes darted away. What are you talking about? I'm fine, I just have a bit of low blood sugar. You know, the battle just now took a lot out of me. Stop pretending. Gil Chong directly interrupted his excuses. He even reached out a finger, lightly tapping the skin around the reactor through the shirt. Those black vascular patterns are already about to crawl up to your neck. If you don't find a way to clear the palladium toxins from your body soon, I'm afraid before those shrapnel pieces pierce your heart, you'll have already gone to meet God due to heavy metal poisoning. Tony Stark's large eyes, which were always full of pride and banter, were now wide and round, his face full of disbelief. This was his biggest secret. Except for Jarvis, no one knew. Not even Pepper or Rhodes knew. How did this guy who dropped from the sky know? And with such precision. How do you know? Seeing Tony's Ascene ghost expression, Gil Chong felt a secret thrill. Yes, that's the expression. Be shocked, mortal. Gil Chong pointed to his own eyes, a mysterious smile curling at the corners of his mouth. Tony, did you forget who I am? My eyes can't just fire lasers, they can also see through many things. What you commonly refer to as X-ray vision. In my eyes, you're like an X-ray film. Gil Chong leaned in closer, lowering his voice. I see those shrapnel pieces embedded in your flesh, and I see those toxins throwing a party in your blood. You're dying, Tony. Of course, Gil Chong would absolutely not tell him that he hadn't actually turned on his X-ray vision just now. What's the fun in looking at a middle-aged man's naked body? That would cost extra, but that didn't stop him from using this excuse to put on a grand act. After hearing this, Tony was completely stunned. His mouth hung open as he looked at Gil Chang's eyes, then down at his own chest. He instinctively tightened his collar, as if that could block that X-ray vision. What the? Tony muttered to himself, his worldview once again under assault. Your eyes can serve as a CT scanner in addition to being a welding torch. That's not scientific. However, Tony's gaze suddenly became somewhat complicated, the look of a drowning man grasping at a straw. Since you can see it, do you have any solution? A solution? Gil Chong looked at Tony's face, which was filled with a desire to live despite his attempts to remain calm. He stood with his hands in his pockets, leaning forward slightly. Of course I have one. In this world, if even I can't save you, then you can go ahead and have Jarvis order a coffin for you. Preferably one with a sliding lid, so it's easier for you to come out for some air. Tony. Although this guy had a sharp tongue, Tony had to admit it. The moment he heard that affirmation, the heart that had been hanging in his throat finally settled back into his chest. Fine, I get it, you're amazing, big guy. Tony breathed a sigh of relief and leaned against the door of his Audi R8, that billionaire swagger returning to him. So, tell me, what do you want? Don't tell me you're doing this for love and peace, and don't say you're an angel sent by God to save me. That's too ridiculous. Whether it's new armor technology or building a temple for you on the roof of Stark Tower, as long as you can solve this timer in my chest, I'll agree to anything. That was Tony Stark. Even when facing death, he spoke as if he were negotiating a business deal. Gil Chong smiled. He liked dealing with smart people. What I want is very simple, Tony. Gil Chong extended a finger and wagged it gently, his eyes filled with unashamed honesty. You know, my goals are quite simple and unpretentious. My greatest wish is to make a lot of money, then wake up every day in a mansion with a Hollywood actress on my left and a Victoria's Secret supermodel on my right. Of course, Gil Chong changed his tone. In front of the public, I have to say it's to help them, to protect the justice of this world. After all, without money, how can I maintain justice? How can I give out relief funds to those suffering civilians? Am I right? Tony listened, stunned. He couldn't help but roll his eyes and complain. I actually thought everything you said earlier about the motherland and home was serious. Turns out you're just like those politicians in Washington, all for the votes and public opinion. Your public persona collapsed way too fast, didn't it? Instead of getting angry, Gil Chong chuckled. He stepped forward and adjusted Tony's collar like an old friend. This is America, isn't it, Tony? I mean, those politicians sitting in the White House, the things they do are far more hypocritical than me. Their mouths are full of ideals, but their hearts are full of business. And isn't this land filled with exactly this kind of thing? One way in public, another way behind closed doors. Gil Chong patted Tony's shoulder, his tone incredibly matter-of-fact. Since I'm called Homelander, I should naturally inherit and promote this spirit. It's a form of cultural heritage. Tony looked on, speechless. Even though it sounded like something a fool would say, if you thought about it carefully. It actually made a bit of sense. This was America. Fine, you win. Tony shrugged helplessly. Dealing with this guy who had godlike power but a mind full of worldly desires actually made him feel more at ease. Desires were good. Desires meant they could trade. Since you're being so honest, I'll be blunt too. Tony pulled a checkbook from his pocket and, without even asking for a price, uncapped his pen. How much do you want? $1 billion, $2 billion, or do you want me to open a secret account for you in Switzerland? As long as I can get this toxin out of my body, this is all pocket change. However, to Tony's surprise, Gil Chong looked at the checkbook and shook his head. No, Tony, you've misunderstood. I don't want money. What? Tony's hand froze, and he looked at him as if he were a lunatic. Are you kidding me? You just said you wanted to make big money, and now that I'm giving it to you, you don't want it. Did the lack of oxygen while flying fry your brain? Gil Chong reached out and pressed down on Tony's hand as it prepared to write a number. Tony, that's dead money. What good is a little bit of cash to me? Once it's spent, I have to earn it again. What I want is the hen that lays the golden eggs, a continuous stream of cash flow, high-quality assets. That's how money makes more money. Gil Chong leaned in closer, showing his true colors. I want shares in Stark Industries. I want dividends. And, I want more original shares. Tony was stunned for a moment, then his eyes narrowed. Well, this appetite was quite large. But on second thought, without Gil Chong, he probably wouldn't have many days left to live anyway. Dying with unspent money would be the ultimate tragedy. Moreover, if he could completely tie such an absurdly powerful, human nuclear bomb to the Stark Industries chariot. Who would dare touch Stark Industries in the future? SHIELD, Hydra, the military, they would all have to step aside. No matter how you calculated it, this deal was a massive win. Fine, you're smart. Tony put away his checkbook and gave Gil Chong a long, admiring look. You're not just a superhero, you're a born capitalist. I'll have Pepper draft a contract later to convert your current holdings into core shares and add an additional 10% stake for you personally. That's something even that bald guy Obadiah only dreams of having. Deal. Gil Chong nodded with satisfaction. 10%. Combined with the shares he had bought earlier at the bottom, he was now the largest individual shareholder of Stark Industries besides Tony. In the future, even if he did nothing, the dividends alone would be enough for him to squander for several lifetimes. This is how knowledge changes fate. Knowing the plot felt so good. All right, the money's settled. Now let's talk about my life. Tony pointed to his chest with some urgency. The toxins there were like a time bomb, causing him constant anxiety. What exactly is your solution? Are you going to use that heat vision of yours to burn the poisoned blood out of me? Gil Chong gave a mysterious smile. No, nothing so violent. Tony, the reason you're being poisoned is that you can't find an energy core to replace the palladium. You've tried every combination on the periodic table and failed, right? That's right, Tony said, somewhat dejectedly. I've tried every known element. Not a single one can replace palladium. But what if? Gil Chong pointed to the sky, then to Tony's head. That element isn't on the periodic table. What if the answer was hidden by your father, Howard Stark, in something you've seen countless times but never truly understood? What? Tony's whole body shook, as if he'd been struck by lightning. My dad. How is that possible? That old man who only knew how to sell weapons. Don't be so quick to deny it. Gil Chong interrupted him, dropping a bombshell. Go back and look through the things your father left behind. Especially that model of the Stark Expo he left in 1974. It's not just a model, Tony. It's the key to the future he left for you. It is the atomic structure of a new element. A bolt of lightning instantly flashed through Tony's brain. Countless fragments of memory began to reassemble. That old model he had dismissed, the thing he had played with as a child. You mean, that structure? Tony's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally to wild joy. He was a genius. With just a little hint, he instantly grasped the key. Oh my God, that old fool. He actually hid a new element in there. Why didn't I think of that? Tony didn't even have time to say goodbye. He turned, pulled open the car door, and jumped into the R8. Vroom.
Thanks for watching my video. Please like and share it.